Yeah, it'll probably regret it, but I'm glad to have you here. So, uh, hey, anybody online? Can you guys, one of you guys on girls unmute and just let me know whether you can hear me?
Yeah, Pat, you're loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you.
I can hear you, Chief.
Thank you. My clock shows about 2 minutes, so we will get started here in just 1 second. Schedule. Okay, my computer's showing 8 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thanks for joining us here for module 21 of our officer development series. We're going to be talking about hotel motel fires today. So for those of you that happen to be online, I do not have the ability to see if you raise your hand or if you send a comment here because I only have a single screen. So if somebody in the room, I don't know if somebody else or if, okay, so we may Chief Brigette may be able to monitor that and let us know if you guys have something that you're trying to, that either there's a problem or if you have a question about something. You're also welcome to unmute if you have a question that we can answer that everybody may want to hear from the group as well. So we always start off with a disclaimer, and this is just to remind you that that the information that we gather here today is based upon the latest information that I can find, based upon Volume 2 and SOPs and modern fire behavior and all the other stuff that I can come across here. But understand that, you know, tomorrow it'll be outdated and moving forward from there. And so anybody that may obviously be watching this in the future in our archives, just understand that this is the latest information that we have. Fires in hotels and motels. You know, there's something that I would say they're not common, but they are frequent enough that we determined I thought that it would be important for us to be familiar with some of the challenges that go along with our fires in hotels and motels. For the folks in the room, how have any of you been to a hotel or motel fire in the last 10 years that you can think of? Just ruined contents or more significant than that? Okay. Okay. So, I mean, they're somewhat frequent. I would tell you that that in my going on 42 years now that I've probably been to 30 or 40 of them, most of them room and contents. We used to, for those of you that, and I know those that work along on Main Street, anywhere on Main Street in Apache Boulevard in Tempe, we used to have the little single-story motels, and those used to burn about once a month in Tempe. Somebody would burn a room off, or occasionally we'd get into the attic and we'd use more than that. But So not uncommon for the motel fires. Hotel fires are a little more unusual because a lot of those are sprinklered. So we don't see as many hotel fires as we probably see the motel fires, and we'll kind of get into some of the reasons why with that. Sorry here. Okay, so some of the unique challenges you have with motel fires is that, you know, there's a difference between, and a lot of times people say, well, motel or a hotel is pretty much the same as an apartment fire. And in a lot of aspects it is, but there's other things that are going to be different from that. And you're going to see things, for example, that the people that occupy them, obviously, if you're living in an apartment, you're probably pretty familiar with the layout of the apartment, how to get out of the apartment. You've been in and out of it 100 times versus somebody that's in town for a day. They're staying in a hotel or motel that they're not familiar with, so they're not really may not understand the layout of the building. Obviously, if the main door is blocked or the egress path is blocked with smoke or fire, that they may not have any idea on how to get out. The other issue you have is obviously people traveling. Some people have been traveling all day, been drinking and driving, well, hopefully not drinking and driving, but driving all day. They get to the hotel, so they're exhausted. So you got people that may not be in as good a condition as you would hope when the alarm goes off. And then you got people that just ignore the evacuation alarms. I know this story time with Pat real quick, a couple years ago or many years ago in Las Vegas, staying in a hotel, fire alarm goes off. And of course, you know, we're on like the 8th floor and thinking, you got to be kidding me, what didn't I do on the 3rd floor? But anyway, so grab my kids, we hauled to go down the stairs here, you know, and only about probably, I'm guessing about 10% of the people came out, because as you're walking by, people are opening up the doors, looking out in the hallway, closing the door and going back inside. So we know that the percentage of people that are going to self-evacuate is going to be somewhat limited unless they are pretty confident that it's actually a real incident. So you have the challenge of evacuation and not necessarily having all the people that are evacuated. The other challenge you have is in an apartment complex on a somewhat regular basis. You probably have a rental manager or somebody that has a pretty good idea of the residents that live there. Now, obviously, there may be visitors and other things, but they have a decent idea maybe of the people that live there. A hotel is going to be a little more challenging because people are popping in, popping out. Some people have, you know, they got reservations, so we may have kind of a list of who may be there, but we don't know if they've checked out already that morning. If you get a call at 4 in the morning, if they already left to head out to the next destination, or are they still there? So we may not have real good accountability for the residents who are there. The other challenge you have with these, the hotel motel fires is just the variability. You got everything from a single story 10-unit motel on East Apache or East Main Street to, you know, a 22-story high-rise 400-unit hotel in downtown Tempe, and so everything in between there. And each one of those obviously creates some different challenges for us from a tactical perspective as well as life safety perspective. So some of this stuff may be a little bit Captain Obvious stuff, and please bear with me, but we try to make these programs kind of self-contained so that in the future, if somebody happens to be watching this program, that they can kind of have a better understanding of kind of what all it entails as far as motel hotel fires. So leading cause obviously is going to be cooking equipment, and you might scratch your head on that one, but that obviously a lot of these are extended stay hotels and those kind of things that have a kitchenette of some kind in there. But more than half of the fires originate in kitchens and hotel fires. But you also have restaurants and a lot of hotels as well. So that's one of the potential sources of our fires. Heating equipment, 16% of the overall property damage, 9% of the calls. Clothes dryers, I know I've been to probably a half dozen clothes dryer or laundry issues or fires in some of the dryers typically. So those are not unusual. I haven't really had a lot of them that have extended past the laundry room, but have generated quite a bit of smoke and caused some problems for us. Smoking, 8%, and this is one that if you look there, 8% of the fires, but 75% of the civilian deaths. And that's probably not surprising to anybody. And I would tell you that, well, you know, sort of without doing any research, but my guess is of those 75% of the deaths are probably going to be, the vast majority of those are going to be in motel, unsprinklered motels. And just like we all know, I've been to some of those incidents that occur in some of the socioeconomically depressed areas that have motels that pay by the hour or day or some of those kind of things, or whatever by the week, that sometimes there's some challenges with people that have utilized additional recreational substances, which sometimes may have altered their ability to understand that they're having an issue. And then also one of the challenges you have is that a lot of those places don't have sprinklers, and a lot of them may or may not have even smoke alarms. And then the last item we have there is electrical and heating equipment, electrical and lighting equipment, 5%. So about 3,900 motel fires a year. That's not a ton if you look at the overall number of fires. 15 deaths, 100 injuries, $100 million in property loss. Now, this is the latest statistics I can find. I'm guessing this has went up probably, at least the property losses went up probably double, but I don't know about the deaths and injuries. But I was unable to find anything from NFPA or anything else with anything newer than 2016. But these are somewhat frequent. They're something that we need to deal with or be prepared to deal with because of the unique challenges associated with them. If you look at it, only 1% of our fires are hotel motel fires. So I'm not sure how many fires we run in Mesa. I'm guessing what, 100 working fires a year. Anybody have any idea? Okay, anyway, but so it probably wouldn't be unusual for us to have at least one motel hotel fire at least a year. So that's something we need to at least be aware of and be prepared for some of the challenges that we may encounter there. Normally these fires occur between 6 and 9 p.m. and why is that? Any ideas? That's where everybody, well, most of the people are going to be there probably, right? Most people, first of all, you can't, you used to be able to check in like 10 in the morning. Now I think you check in like 4 anymore. And now you can't even hardly get into hotels before 3 o'clock anyway. So probably between 6 and 9 is certainly when people are going to be, if they are an extended stay, are going to be cooking or eating, which is the primary cause, but also it's when the vast majority of people will at least be at the hotel. We already talked about cooking being the leading cause. Bedrooms being the primary area of origin. Well, that's once again probably pretty obvious because a lot of these hotel rooms are just a bedroom. So that shouldn't be surprising anybody. The next 2 bullet points I think are kind of interesting for us. The smoke alarms were not present in 10% of these things, and then automatic sprinklers were not present in 45% of these fires. So it shouldn't be, I mean, it is a situation where I'm guessing the vast majority of those 45% are going to be motels versus hotels, but either way, it is certainly a possibility for us to encounter a fire that's not extinguished by a sprinkler system, but is actually still a working fire and something that may be extending into either other floors or into the attic of the building itself. So why are motel fires and hotel fires a little more dangerous and deadly than maybe an apartment? Once again, we talked about this. The occupants may be traveling for a while. They may be tired, maybe deeper asleep than normal, consumed alcohol or other edibles or who knows what may be associated with that. The other factor you have is that for people that obviously aren't familiar with the facility they're staying in is the disorientation, getting up in the middle of the night and trying to figure out, what's going on. They open the door and there's smoke in the hallway and they're in an area or a building they're not familiar with. The other inherent hazard you have with hotels is that it's a large occupancy, obviously, because there's a large number of rooms and people staying there. They're not going to be familiar with the layout. We've talked a little bit about that, and then getting people to an accountability is another challenge we've talked about as well going in with these structures. Hotel motel fires can be deadly. I mean, these are some of the ones that you're probably familiar with in the past. These are some of the bigger ones that have occurred since way back in the day here. Some 100 plus people, 28 in Tucson, 87 in the MGM Grand, 98 in Puerto Rico. But we don't see a lot of that right now. What we're probably going to see more of is this. We've got 6 people killed in a motel fire in Michigan. People, 1 individual missing here, just different fatalities. So I would say that if we're going to have probably a multiple fatality incident, we're probably going to have something in the motel, a smaller motel, non-sprinklered motel situation than we probably will in a major facility, unless we have a compromised sprinkler system. We typically don't have significant working structure fires in hotels with sprinkler system on a regular basis. Now, it is a possibility because we found with our high-rise training that in almost 50% of our situations where we've actually had a working high-rise fire that the one or more of the suppression systems or protection systems has failed. So why hotels and motels? We got bunches of them. We got hundreds of them throughout the valley. Obviously, if you drive down any street here in any one of the major thoroughfares, you're going to see hotels or motels scattered throughout. So it's certainly a possibility for us to encounter a fire in one of these facilities here. Some are high rises like we have here, the Salt River and downtown Mesa thing that we have. But if you look at some around the valley, there's all kinds of different shapes and sizes here. This is the Crown Plaza Resort in Chandler here, downtown Chandler. You can see its layout here, a pretty significant size footprint. And the other challenge you have, similar to what we have with our garden style apartments, is if you start looking at access, and a lot of these are overhead pictures, and I specifically took the overhead pictures for us to see. But if you start looking at access, we have pretty good access around the side of this facility from the exterior of it. But if we were to have a fire in this courtyard here, I mean, we don't have the ability to probably certainly don't have the ability to get aerial apparatus inside that courtyard here if we have window rescues or whatever. So we're probably going to be throwing ground ladders. You can also see here, these are tile roofs. And so our access to be able to get up there if we want to do any roof work is going to be, for the most part, eliminated. So just look at some of the layout of some of these and some of the challenges and setbacks that you may have as far as if you respond to one of these type of events. This is the McCormick Ranch in Scottsdale. You can see the facility layout here. Large facility, but you also notice that there's probably not going to be any access to this side of the structure. So if you have a fire in one of these areas down in here, everything you're going to be doing is going to be extended hose lays, portable ladders and those kind of things. You're not going to have the options that you would certainly on anything that occurs up here in the parking lot or near the upper areas here. So just things to think about when you get dispatched or you pull up a pre-plan or you look on the map and you start seeing some of these facilities, and certainly some cities have more than others. Gilbert right now, as I looked around, they don't have a ton of resorts, but they have a ton of the new 3 to 6 story hotels, the single building hotels. I mean, they're everywhere on every corner, and they're building them as fast as they can. Tempe has, not only they have the little single stories on East Apache, but they've got I think the 20 or 22 story is the tallest hotel they have right now in downtown. I think it's right off of Mellon University there on the northeast corner there. And they're building more all the time. So we do have everything in between there. So we need to be prepared for whatever we may encounter. So we talked about setbacks and access issues. This is Embassy Suites in Scottsdale here. Once again, from the exterior, we've got great access, great ability to get our ladder trucks all the way around here if we need to and stuff. But if you look at, we have an incident that occurs on one of the interior hotel rooms here, much more challenging for us as far as getting access, getting hand lines deployed and doing the things that we need to do. So just things to consider here. The Buttes in Tempe. Move this out of the way here. I can't. The Buttes in Tempe, you can see some of the challenges they have there. Not only do we have mountains surrounding this thing on different sides, but the elevation comes around that makes it very challenging for us as far as being able to get access. Is once again, if we have an incident on this side in one of the rooms on this side of the building, trying to get not only to that part of the building, but get through a hallway or whatever that gets us into the center hallway of these structures, work our way down to the involved unit, and then get water on the fire may be a significant delay for us. So just something to consider. This is one of the new hotels in downtown Tempe. There's another one here. So they've got quite a few of them here, and they obviously can create some significant challenges for us. All center hallway type hotels and a large number of guests, obviously, depending on the time of year. This is what I was talking about with Gilbert, and these are every city, but certainly a bunch of them in Gilbert. I know that they probably put up probably a dozen of these in Gilbert that I'm aware of that I drive because I live there, that I drive by probably a couple of times a week. So these are everywhere, obviously sprinkled, but the lightweight construction, mid-rise buildings. So one of the challenges, excuse me, and we weren't going to get into a ton of the mid-rise stuff because I have a whole different lecture on that we'll talk about here in a minute, but these can be very challenging for us. Even though they will have sprinklers, they may or may not have standpipes depending on the city and what was agreed upon there. So they may be very difficult for us as far as getting hand lines in place and on the 3rd or 4th floor on the center hallway. They're very difficult to ventilate because they don't typically have pressurized systems to be able to evacuate the smoke from these structures. So there's a lot of challenges that go along with these mid-rise structures, and they do burn. And you'll see some of that here in a few minutes here. So we got resorts, hotels, and motels. For the most part, the differences between the three are resorts are typically a bigger footprint. They usually have more setbacks and more features that make it a little more challenging from the topography and lakes and other things that may make it a little more difficult for us to gain access to the fire rooms themselves. They also, a lot of the resorts will have conventions or large meeting rooms, which can create some challenges for us on occasion. They have most of the resorts will have restaurants on site or banquet facilities on site, which once again leads us to the potential for a restaurant fire, significant restaurant fire that may or may not extend into the building itself. And then a lot of them have multiple pools and lazy rivers and those kind of things, which are obviously nice amenities if you're there. But if we're trying to gain access to one of the rooms that may be involved here, it may be some of the setbacks may create some challenges for us. Hotels. A lot of times they're going to be single self-contained units between 1 and 6 stories in height. Usually have a 360-degree access somewhat available. Sometimes may or may not have a single small restaurant. A lot of times it's just going to be a little area that they provide a breakfast or a small breakfast or something of that nature. A lot of them have a single pool, maybe a small banquet or meeting room. And then when we get down to the motels, we're talking about either single or 2-story, sometimes 3-story facilities. A lot of times these structures are going to have the parking out front, so you can open your door and you can see your car a lot of times on these type of buildings. 360-degree access, no restaurant, single pool, and no meeting rooms are going to be what you're going to see a lot of times there. So you can see an example of that, of just like Mountain Shadows here on the left, the resort, the 6-story hotel in the middle, and then the single-story little strip of row strip of motel rooms there. So some of the basic information, obviously, we've all been to hotels or motels, so probably not a surprise on the layout of the rooms. Most of the rooms average between 200 and 400 square feet, so it's going to be a little smaller than most of our apartments. Well, probably quite a bit smaller than most of our apartments we go to, unless it's a suite, which we'll talk about here in a second. But for the most part, it's going to be a pretty small room, which should allow us with 1 hand line, an 1 3/4 hand line, to manage a good percentage of the fires in a single individual room that hasn't extended. So that's the good part of when we respond to these type of facilities. And you can see some of the layouts of some of the other rooms here. This is obviously just some different, the single king bed, the two queens. You can just kind of see the layout. Some of these will be, just what it looks like, and so it's not a surprise to any of us here. But then we have suites. There's suites are a little bit different. They're going to be a little bit larger, probably looking at the 400 to 500 square foot. A lot of them will have 2 separate rooms, so a little bit larger for us, a little more of a fire load. Still a single 1 3/4 hand line. Probably will be able to manage a good percentage of the fires in these types of suites, because they're still, once again, not going to be huge rooms, but they're going to be a little more challenging for us. May require a second crew as far as conducting a search or completing a fire extinguishment. And then we have the extended stay stuff. These are the folks that are working from out of town that may be staying in some of these facilities for a month or 2 months while they're working on a project or something like that. So those buildings are going to be a little bit larger. Once again, probably still less than 1,000 square feet, but you may have 2 or 3 rooms. A lot of times you'll typically have a little kitchenette set up here. So once we talk about the primary cause being cooking fires, so a little better chance of probably having an incident where you have a cooking fire there, something in a little bit of a kitchenette like this. And some of these facilities obviously may or may not be sprinklered, so it could certainly result in a significant fire for us. The hotel floor layouts can be anything, and we know that, anything you can imagine. So everything from just a square building with 1 center hallway to L shapes to U shapes to, to just about any kind of shape you can imagine here. So you can see kind of the layout just of this room here, with just, the different bedrooms and bathrooms layout here. Here's another one of them, and I forgot to should have left the name on here. One of the hotels in Mesa here. You can see the pre-plan for it. Another example of that, but you can just kind of see the layout of these things. One of the things we'll talk about in a minute here is how the void spaces and plumbing and utility chases, obviously, they try to back them up to at least one other unit so that they have less area to work in, or to, as we provide those utility services, they typically will be along a center or common wall here, which creates a challenge for us as far as fire spread, but also helps us to try to locate maybe where the source of the fire may be extending as well. Lobbies, and obviously for small hotels, you may just have 1 single desk at the front, and then typically there'll be a little, maybe a little area where they have a continental breakfast, and that's about it, maybe 2 or 3 chairs in the front lobby. And then obviously as we get into the larger hotels and resorts, you get into much larger rooms here, so you may have a much bigger lobby area here that you can certainly have a fire in, but probably not quite as likely, other than maybe an electrical fire. Restaurants, certainly a lot of the resorts, or the vast majority of the resorts will have a restaurant of some kind, and even some of the hotels will have at least a small restaurant that may be associated with that, which certainly can create some challenges for us from a search and rescue perspective, as well as a potential source of fire and extension into the building itself. Yes, please. Yep. Derek online, looks like somebody raised a hand here. Derek, did you have a question for us that you can unmute if you want? And if not,
yeah,
send
Chief,
that.
I'm not sure if,
Please.
Yeah, Derek Weatherford, Gilbert Fire Chief. You said you were going to touch on it later, so if I jumped the gun, I apologize. But from my understanding, the biggest difference between mid-rise and high-rise is below 6 floors is considered a mid-rise, or 6 or lower, and then high-rise is basically 7 and up. Is that correct?
It depends on who you talk to. A lot of people will say 7 and below is a mid-rise. Others will say 7 and above is a high-rise. A lot of the fire code says that 75 feet is the difference. So it depends on obviously how tall the ceilings are on each floor here. But at 75 feet is the requirement. Typically, it changes you from a mid-rise to a high-rise, and then you have all the requirements of sprinkler systems, standpipes, smoke removal systems, and everything else at the 75-foot level. That answer your question?
Yes, Chief. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Nope. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So as we get into some of the larger hotels, obviously we have ballrooms and large meeting rooms and stuff, which can create some challenges for us if we were to have an incident in one of these facilities. I don't know if any of you were around and Tempe had their the fire that they had in their at ASU and their student union. Sorry, this is probably 10 or 15 years ago. A 3 or 4 alarm incident they had in the student union. But one of the things that they had here, and it ended up being an arson fire, but they have a large meeting room. But one of the things that they had, which created a huge problem for them, is stacked chairs. And one of the back storage rooms, they had stacked chairs and tables, all plastic. Fire started there, which created a tremendous amount of not only fire, but smoke and heat throughout the building. And so you could have a situation, something like that, where you could arrive on a large ballroom and have 0 visibility, high heat conditions, and a working fire in a pretty significant sized room. So just, something we're not going to see every day. This is an incident that occurred in Phoenix in one of their downtown ballrooms, and I think it ended up being a ballast or something of that nature. But certainly something we need to be aware of, and certainly could happen. Not something we're going to see every day, but certainly could be a challenge for us if we were to stumble across one of these type of events. So hotel construction itself, obviously ordinary. There's the 2 primary options you're going to see for the stuff we're going to talk about today is going to be ordinary construction and lightweight construction. Like I said, we got these lightweight hotels going up all over the valley here that, the 1 to 7 story stuff that you'll see everywhere. Stuff that was built certainly before 1980, and certainly anything built before 1970 is going to be probably ordinary construction. May or may not have a tile roof. A lot of times going to have asphalt shingle roof, but may or may not have a tile roof. Anything built since the 80s is going to be you're probably going to be leaning a little more toward lightweight construction. There are some variables. Online, I found some of these here. You got metal studs here on this one. Ordinary construction with block construction. I mean, I don't know that we have many of these that have been built recently in Arizona that I've driven by anyway. So you may encounter something like this, but I'm not aware of them. But certainly there are some other things that would make certainly either the building much stronger or weaker, depending on the type of construction. One of the challenges you have through hotel and motel fires you're always going to have is fire extending through plumbing chases, mansards, over balconies, through floors. Those are some of the areas we have the potential for fire spread. And we talked about the construction. Once again, we had the 50s and 60s. We're going to have the ordinary construction, lightweight construction, 70s and 80s, and for the most part, all lightweight construction since the 80s. But keep in mind that if we lose a hotel or motel fire, a building, it's going to be probably 95% of the time because it got into the attic. And this happens pretty regularly on even some of the newer construction because of void space fires, and some of our attics in some of these facilities are not sprinklered. Depending on the city you're in, they may or may not require sprinklers in the attics themselves. So if we have a void space fire that works its way up into the attic, there's a chance you may burn the roof off some of these facilities, and it happens pretty regularly. I've found I can't probably at least 30 or 40 of these incidents that have occurred here, and I've got multiple pictures that'll show you some of these sprinklered structures where they burned the roof off of them. The thing we need to obviously make sure of that if we have an incident in these type of facilities is to check for extension and check for extension oil early. Check those void spaces, and if we do that, try to get ahead of it and check and try to keep the fire from extending above. Obviously, this will probably save the building. You also have that possibility of auto extending the fire up through either from window to window or burning through the floors themselves, because a lot of times we just have lightweight trusses as far as the floors here. So if we look at the common attics, obviously there's a good percentage of these structures are going to have common attics depending on the size of the building. If we start getting into resorts and stuff, you may or may not have a common attic. It'll probably be broken up a little more than it would be in certainly some of these other smaller facilities. But I would tell you a good percentage of the single-story motel fires that you have in your cities, if you still have any, are going to be a common attic. And I've watched multiple buildings like this burn to the ground. Unfortunately, as that fire gets into the attic, it extends very quickly into the attic. And then once again, if you don't get ahead of it and try to cut it off very quickly, you end up burning the roof off of some of these structures. So you see an example here of the fire in the attic space here that's traveled up through the building itself, gone into the attic. Once again, sprinkler structure, fire traveled through void spaces, got into the attic here. Same thing here. So these are structures that, once again, you'd think they're relatively new. You'd think they'd be sprinkled. Wouldn't be a challenge for us. Wouldn't be a problem for us. But they are a potential a problem where we can lose the building, or at least burn the roof off of the structure here if we're not careful about addressing void spaces in some of these fires. Please. I don't believe so. The information that I can find on most of these is not balloon framed. Now, I mean, the vast majority of the vast majority of ones I've been able to find, as far as just the research and looking at them, looks like they've been built easily since the 80s. And so I mean, once again, you would think this would certainly lend toward a balloon frame type of situation. But a lot of these buildings are relatively new construction, but just void space extension. And then a lot of, I don't know if we have anybody from Scottsdale online. Scottsdale didn't used to require sprinklers in the attic. And so I don't know if they do yet. I know they require sprinklers in almost every building in Scottsdale, even residential structures. But forever, they didn't require attic sprinklers. So that was one of the reasons that we burned houses down in Scottsdale and other places, because the fire would get up into the attic and that obviously would travel where it wanted to. So I'm not sure exactly, without getting into too much research on some of these here, that the situation, but some of these are sprinklered and relatively new buildings. Now, also keep in mind that some cities, I'm not sure about here in the Valley, but I know nationally, because they talk about it in some of the articles I've read, they do trade-offs on a lot of these. The Fire Prevention Division will do trade-offs where if they provide setbacks and access and other things, they may, for a 3 or 4 story structure, they may not require sprinklers at all. So which is an unusual bit that, that's dependent on the city and stuff. There's a lot of trade-offs that occurred, even in the East Valley here, where different fire prevention divisions will trade off whether it be sprinkler systems or access or the width of the roads and other things based upon other things, fire protection features that they may provide. So we look at those avenues of fire spread. Obviously, the vertical void spaces you can see here. A lot of times you have stacked plumbing and utility chases just because it makes more sense for them to do that. So you'll see the bathrooms. I'll give you an example of that here, right here. So you can see here that we have the bathrooms are typically from between different rooms or back to back, so that those plumbing chases can go all up one spot instead of running them every single room. Now they can run them up one common wall, and they have one area that allows them to kind of combine those utility items, the pipes and other things all in one area. The problem for us is that it creates an area for void space for that fire to travel all the way up that common wall, all the way up into the attic if we're not careful and don't address it early. So you can see, obviously, fire starts down below, may work its way up through the void spaces and all the way into the attic if we're not careful. Here's another example of fires extended into the attic. Once again, 2-story here, but when extended, my guess is a 2-story, unless it's recently built, probably or may not have a sprinkler system, but with a common attic, it doesn't take long, obviously, for that fire to extend. So when the fire gets into the void spaces and gets into the ceiling or the attic, obviously we need to address that as quickly as possible by gaining access into the attic. Well, certainly gaining access into the walls and checking for that extension. But then also, if necessary, check in the attic early in the process to make sure we don't have attic involvement. And if we do, make sure we deploy hand lines and stuff to try to address that very quickly. This is the situation you can see on the right here. They probably pulled a little more ceiling. They probably maybe needed to, certainly for the fire attack here. And it may have came down just because of the amount of water they flowed in there. I can't tell. But I can't see any fire damage to the trusses itself there. So I'm not sure what they had going on. But anyway, we need to, we talk about for attic fires, keeping vent limited fires vent limited if we can. So that would certainly be in our best interest, but also understanding that we need to gain access to be able to get water and cool the superheated gases and surfaces in the attic to try to put the fire out if it makes its way up there. Mansards are a real challenge for us. Some of the newer facilities don't have necessarily mansards to speak of, but certainly the older facilities, a lot of the motels, the Motel 6s especially, were notorious for having mansards. It definitely provides an avenue for fire spread. You get that fire in the room, for example, in the one we have here. Fire rolls out the front door, gets into the mansard overhead here, and travels around the entire facility through the mansard, working its way into the attic. So not unusual for us to find these fires here. And so if we're not careful. So we need to address the mansard as quickly as possible. Certainly as we're conducting our overhaul and fire control and checking for extension, opening up that mansard, making sure it has got in there, certainly gonna be one of the things we want to do. On occasion, you'll find that in some situations, our best attack for this may be a combination attack, where if we don't have, a lot of these mansard roofs they'll have a tile fascia on the mansard itself, but the roof itself is a flat roof that our ladder trucks actually can gain access to and work off of. So you may end up having a situation where you have a combined attack, where you have a ladder truck up on the roof cutting through the backside of the mansard, utilizing hand lines on the roof to try to cut the fire off, or you have crews down below opening up the mansard from below to try to gain access and cut off the fire as well. So that's an option you may consider, or may at least see in some of these situations from the perspective of trying to cut off those fires. So this is obviously the Motel 6. You see these are everywhere. These are typically have been built in the 70s and 80s, but there's still a million of them around there. So you can see the mansard here, obviously not a surprise to anybody. Here's another example of a mansard here that that they've checked here. It wasn't, didn't extend past that. This is an incident that occurred in Phoenix a little while back, Motel 6. You can see this here. Obviously a significant working fire in the attic space here that's extended from this room into the attic here. And then you probably have seen this, but you'll see a Mayday, or should have been a Mayday situation. They didn't declare one here. But as with the kind of funny, because the knowledge man just keeps working like there's no problem at all. He just continues spraying water, doesn't even worry about it. The other guy shoved the roof pile of roof off him and just keeps acting like, well, let's just keep working here. So, but could have been a close call, could have been some injuries, could have been a significant problem for him, and was, I would say, a near miss here. But so just, this is one of the other hazards you have, obviously, is you have not only the potential for fire spread, but also for early roof failure there. So you can see that, once again, I'm not sure if they should have been operating in that area, because you could already see the trusses from below, but I wasn't there, so I won't comment on that one. Firewalls, fire stops, these are some of the challenges you have as poke-throughs, just like anything else. When people are building these facilities, they're not building for fire protection, they're building to save money and try to get put something in place and so that they have a reasonably good-looking facility for people to rent, and doing it as cheaply as possible. So you'll see poke-throughs, you'll see other stuff like that. It obviously provides avenues for fire spread for us, or for them, so you can see this kind of stuff. So it's not unusual, even though if things were all in place, may prevent that fire spread. Certainly not unusual to see that fire spread as a result of these type of poke-throughs. Firewalls are pretty unusual. I looked around. I literally went through a million pictures. I drove around. I looked at a lot of aerial pictures of a lot of the hotels and stuff that we have in the valley here. And I don't know that I really found a whole lot of firewalls. I know they exist because you see them on some of the pictures that I see on the internet. So I know that you may see them, but I wouldn't probably expect one. But I would tell you, if you're a ladder company officer and get to the roof for a roof report and you find one, certainly you want to report that. And if you're obviously down below, or if you're working on an incident and you can see that one of these, what appears to be a firewall, certainly check to make sure that wall's intact, that firewall's intact. But certainly a great cutoff point if we're able to determine that. But I didn't see a whole lot of them, so I'm not sure if we have, and you may, I don't know if anybody knows of any, but I'm not aware of any that I've seen anyway. Lightweight floor trusses. This is what you're going to see in a good percentage of our, certainly anything that's been built probably since the 80s are going to be lightweight floor trusses. So we need to understand that if we have a fire in one of the rooms on the first floor, if you go to the second floor above that, obviously we need to consider it's almost like working above a basement. So we need to be careful about the possibility of being able to fall through some of these structures. So being aware of you have lightweight trusses sounding your way in on these things is something you want to consider. I wouldn't just walk right in to these facilities because you have that without at least sounding in or being aware of the situation, because there is potential for you to fall through and into the floor below. Balconies and landings are another area you have, especially when you have those two-story single row or row style hotels where you have a fire coming out of the one floor, obviously impacting the balcony above that. You send crews above that floor may be compromised as they go to check out the room above. So the three primary types of hotels or motels that you're going to see on a regular basis. You have the garden style, which is basically kind of a center courtyard, a center hallway where you have the access to the rooms are from the center of or from a stairwell or elevator to in the interior of the structure. And then you have the row style rooms here as far as hotels and motels. The garden style complexes, the challenge we have there is obviously that if we have a fire in one of the inside, coming out of one of the inside rooms here, is the challenge of trying to extend hand lines into that courtyard area to be able to address a fire that may be occurring in there. So it's going to be a little bit of a delay potentially. A lot of times you'll see they have windows obviously on the parking lot side. So you may have a situation where you can conduct a transitional attack from the exterior, but otherwise just understand you may have difficulty just having the challenge of extending a hand line into the interior courtyard to be able to gain access and to fight the fire, which for anybody that we know, even though we should be very proficient in extending hand lines, it's going to delay things a little bit versus coming straight off an engine company. Most of these are going to be between 1 and 3 stories in height. Usually that most of the time they'll have a balcony, but primary extension is going to be into the attic space is going to be one of the challenges of the rooms next door. So this is what we're talking about, the garden style center courtyard area here, where it may be a little more challenging for us to gain access and get crews on the fire. Center hallway hotels, these are a huge challenge for us, and I've got a whole different lecture on mid-rise fire, so we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about that other than just maybe a few specifics associated with it, because these are a completely different fire. I used to think before I did the mid-rise class, I thought mid-rises were just small high-rises, and they're not. And I've got a chart that'll show some of the differences here in just a second, but these are a real potential challenge for us. They have all the challenges of a 5-story building without any of the protection features a lot of times that a high-rise has, built-in protection features. They're very, very challenging for us. You can see some of these hallways go on for about a half a mile. You got multiple rooms, no smoke evacuation systems, no windows that we can open. There's just a lot of challenges for us and then large numbers of people here. So could be a real challenge for us as far as being able to gain access, get these folks out, safely get these folks out, get hand lines in place, those kind of things. A lot of these facilities may or may not have a standpipe system. A good percentage of them will not. A lot of them, the newer stuff will probably certainly be sprinklered, but some of the early stuff probably won't be. So there's some challenges that may be associated with their center hallway stuff that we have here. You can see kind of an example of what that looks like. Once again, got hallways going forever here. The challenge you have with the enclosed hallway stuff is that obviously it's going to add time for us to gain access to the fire room. So if we have a significant fire on the 4th floor of a center hallway hotel, the challenges we have is, once again, they may or may not have a standpipe system. We hope they do. It's going to be a little bit easier because then we can kind of deploy hand lines like we do off a high-rise fire, but those may or may not be in place. So we may have to extend lines up from the ground. We've got options there that we can consider, if we have an aerial on site of putting an aerial up to maybe the room, 1 or 2 rooms over, busting out a window, going in with taking a hand line off the bucket itself, and considering maybe deploying a hand line from that perspective may be the easiest and fastest way to get there. If it's on the 1st, 2nd floor, we might be able to do the same thing, or maybe even as much as the 3rd floor. We have a 35 foot, the tallest portable ground ladder we have. Do we have anything bigger than 35s on our trucks here and ladders? Okay, so 35 footer may or may not, it should get you to at least the window frame, I'm guessing, of a 3rd-story building, at least on a lot of our facilities. So that may be an option for us as far as deploying a hand line into a nearby room and working our way around versus trying to come all the way off the truck, all the way up through a stairwell up 4 floors and then 85 or 100 feet down a hallway. Could be a real challenge for us. So just understand that these center hallway structures can be a real problem for us. Without having balconies and stuff, you don't, once again, the number of, and a lot of these windows don't open. So we don't have that ability, or at least not easily don't have that ability to do window rescues and remove people out the windows that we might have on an apartment complex that is obviously designed for the windows to open here. So big problem for us here. We got to decide whether we're going to shelter people in place, whether we're going to evacuate everybody through the smoke. Once again, our biggest challenge there, and our certainly our best thing we can do, quickest water, best water. The quicker we can get units up there to get water on the seat of the fire, the better we're going to be. Chief, please.
Yeah.
Derek, you have another question for us?
Yeah, Chief, back to ladder height. I'm not sure
Yes.
if all Chandler ladders carry this height, but we pulled a ladder off of the Chandler ladder when we were there, and it was a 40-foot ladder, 40-foot extension.
40 footer. Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you. That gives us, and anybody else that may be online, if you have something other than a 35, let me know. Just unmute your mic and let me know. But a 40-footer gives us some other options now. It's probably going to get us maybe to the roof of a 3-story hotel, maybe a little bit of a tight angle. You may see people climbing that ladder like a snake when you're trying to cover, but you don't have the great climbing angle. But a 40-footer might get us to the roof of a 3-story hotel. And certainly as we talk about center courtyard areas where we don't have the ability to get an aerial involved in it, it may be the only thing we have. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Derek. The row style hotel motels, obviously you can see you have the side-by-side rooms, typically 1 to 4 stories. Most of the stuff you're going to see is 1 to 3. And I would tell you, as we go down on the older parts of your towns here, there's still, I think, just maybe 1 or 2 left in Tempe. I know as I was driving down Main Street in Mesa, there's probably at least 15 or 20 that I'm aware of here. They're going to be the single-story motels here. And then you have the 2-story Motel 6 layout here like we have on the right there. Those are everywhere, certainly built in the 60s and 70s, maybe early 80s. And then as we start getting into newer stuff, you start seeing the 3-story stuff and then some 4-story stuff on occasion here. But not unusual to have common attics in these facilities, common party walls. So you have that potential for extension, not only side to side, but obviously to the attic space above there, a common attic above. You can see here just another example of a fire, certainly that, and this is going to be one that, the good thing about this one, I can't tell, but it almost looks like it has a flat roof. So the good thing about this is you're probably going to have rafters or a 2x10 rafter or something. So you're probably not necessarily going to have a big attic space for extension, and probably be a little easier for us to confine that fire to that individual room. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but just so you can see, I included it here in case you want to log in later and take a look at this. But here's some of the similarities and differences between motels, hotels, and apartments, so you can just kind of get a general idea. The differences that you might just identify and see that why hotels and motels aren't just apartments. You can't necessarily consider them just specifically apartments. There's certainly some differences there. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. You can go back and look at it later if you need to. The other chart I have here is the differences between mid-rises and high-rises. This is one we talked about, some of the challenges we have as we start looking at mid-rises versus high-rises and those fire protection features that we talked about, and how this can be a real challenge for us as far as when we respond to these mid-rise fires versus a high-rise fire. Once again, the built-in fire protection features in a high-rise, if they're working, certainly has a much better chance of being able to confine the fire to the area of origin or room of origin versus a mid-rise fire, which, like I say, a lot of times won't have the fire control room, won't have the smoke removal systems, may or may not have sprinkler systems, not going to have a fire pump. Just a lot of the things that we have on a high-rise fire is not available for us on a mid-rise fire. So you can look this over at your convenience if you want to log back in and see this later here. So because, like I say, because I did a whole module on mid-rise hotel fires, we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about the mid-rise fires today or the high-rise fires, just because I have separate modules that'll specifically deal with those issues there. So just trying to, so today we're going to focus mostly on the stuff that's going to be below 7 stories. So you'll see some of the mid-rise stuff here. If we talk about high-rise hotel fires, now there are some similarities from the standpoint of you're going to have the same challenges with occupants as far as being confused, not being familiar with the layout, not being familiar with some of like I say, some of the entrances and exits other than the lobby. But for the most part, if we have a high-rise hotel fire, we're probably going to be using the high-rise. Well, we will be using the high-rise 7-unit deployment model. Will be our primary approach to a high-rise fire in a hotel, which will be probably no different than any other high-rise fire we have. So there's, once again, we have a whole module on that if you want to log into and I'll leave a QR code up here at the end a little bit if you want to look and see the module. We have a whole 2-hour class on high-rise fires as well. And they do burn. They don't have a lot of them, but they do burn occasionally, and then they're certainly going to be a challenge for us. So hotels under construction. These are something that, have any of you ever been to a hotel? Well, it's really no different than a stick farm fire. Has everybody been to a stick farm fire for the most part? Huge problem for us. These are the good thing about them is they're typically smaller than an apartment complex wood frame fire, which are spectacular. Those typically go to 3 or 4 or 5 alarms and burn down 3 or 4 or 5 acres of 3 or 4 story wood frame structures. They're spectacular to see and dangerous and really can potentially damage your fire equipment and other things if we're not careful with them. But these are typically a little bit smaller. I've been to 2 of these in my 42 years, so it's not something you see every day, but certainly a potential challenge for us. The big thing you need to understand anytime you're dealing with a stick frame fire is position your apparatus pessimistically. Understand that if it's got a significant hole in it, the chance of you putting that fire out is pretty slim. I mean, I've seen it once or twice, and some of the stuff that I've seen here in my many years, and because obviously the fire was small and didn't have any wind that day, and crews got there early and deployed portable monitors and deck guns and other things that just really things worked out perfect for them. But for the most part, I would tell you, if you have a significantly involved wood frame structure, be pessimistic with your apparatus placement. Park outside the collapse zone. Don't pull inside the complex. Give yourself some space. Get a supply line. Use master streams and aerial devices, large diameter hoses, those kind of things here, because otherwise you're going to probably find yourself having to relocate apparatus or running for your lives if you're not careful here. So stay outside the collapse zone. Look for natural cutoff points. Some of the larger complexes, you may have a situation where you have multiple buildings that there's exposures. They may have actual some separation between them, so that may give us an opportunity potentially to cut off a larger hotel fire or something that may be a resort where you have multiple buildings here. You may also, if you have multiple buildings and some are further along in the construction from the standpoint of having stucco or other things, you certainly have a better chance of making a stop at that location. So things to look for. I would tell you that if you get dispatched to one of these type of facilities, you leave the structure or you leave your station and you see a column of smoke, I would go to a first alarm. It's going to take every bit of a first alarm for a significant fire here. Protect exposures if you can. Do not position your apparatus inside the complex, and then obviously wind direction and speed is going to be a big factor for us. So here's a couple of videos of some of these you can see here, get an idea of what it looks like here. So that's probably 80-foot flames there, something like that. So we don't have enough water certainly available to us at any point in time, and enough apparatus that are going to be on the scene to make a difference here. This building's going to burn to the ground. The only thing we can hope for is to keep it from extending to any other buildings or anything that's occupied around it here. Not unusual to see this kind of involvement. I know certainly
it's so hot.
Certainly the stick farm fires that I've been to, apartment complexes, it's not unusual to show up and have more than one building on fire.
More breaking news tonight in Camarillo. Take a look at this. A 4-story hotel under construction engulfed in flames. The fire started after 7 o'clock, briefly shut down the nearby 101 freeway in both directions because of exposed power lines. The destroyed structure is adjacent to the popular premium outlet stores. Thick black smoke could be seen from miles away. This time-lapse video here shows how quickly that fire spread. Air 7 HD was over the smoldering scene hours later. That's all that's left. Good news, nobody was injured.
So you can see apparatus placement there. Obviously, they did a good job of staying away from this structure here. Still being able to get master streams on this incident here, but nothing they were going to do was going to stop that fire from burning that whole structure down. That time-lapse video is actually, if any of you have ever been to a stick farm fire, apartment complex or anything like that, it's not terribly far off from how fast it seems like these things move. So just be aware that these things can move very quickly, and going in with the thought that you're going to put these things out is maybe a big mistake for us. So we talk about motels. A lot of these are going to be ordinary construction because a lot of these, you don't see as many of these being built currently, at least from what I've seen and driving around stuff. I haven't seen a 1 or 2-story motel being built in a long time. I think obviously from a profit perspective, everybody's moving to the 5- and 6-story stuff that's out there now, maybe a 4-story, but I haven't seen anything that looks like one of these built in quite some time. But so you can see what the majority is going to look like. You're going to see, especially in your older areas, you're going to see the stuff like that bottom left corner, just a single level, common attic, ordinary construction, maybe 10 or 15 or rooms on each side there. It's not unusual. You see a lot of the stuff like you have in that top right corner up there where you have a 2-story mansard, tile mansard, flat roof, ordinary construction with maybe 25 or 30 rooms. So you see these are pretty common that are still available out there throughout our cities. So these can be certainly some challenges for us. They do burn like anything else we know. Here's some examples like a floor plan and something like that. So where's the fire? Obviously the locations, we've talked a little bit about the types of fires and the causes of the fires, but we're going to briefly run through some of the different areas, obviously, where these fires are the common locations for these fires. So we talk about the guest rooms. Obviously, this is the most common area where we see our fires starting. It's not much different than an apartment complex. We talked about that. That'd be a little bit smaller than it would be otherwise. You know, if we're careful and get there early, we probably can confine that fire to the room of origin if we get early notification. But there's certainly going to be a challenge. We get an early fire attack, getting quick water on the fire, doing a transitional attack if possible, and then conducting a quick search and rescue is going to be our primary responsibility. Kitchen restaurant fires, the challenge you have there is once again, it's no different than responding to a McDonald's or something else. The fires we have in some of these, the evacuation systems, the vent systems over the fryers and other stuff certainly can give us an area for extension into the attic space. Some of these restaurants at these hotels are separate and have a firewall between them and the hotel. Other times they're built into the hotel itself, so it may or may not have spread into the structure itself. The other challenge you have with just like anything else, like and any of you that have ever been to a restaurant fire, is half the time you get there, unless it's fully well involved or has significant smoke, is you have to evacuate people that are still there. People, you know, they're eating and they don't believe that the alarm's going off and they got to finish their sandwich or whatever else it is. And so you may need to work on evacuating people out of the building. Also, the workers a lot of times will stay inside and try to put the fire out because they didn't call you initially because they thought they could put it out themselves. Just make sure that the doors are closed between the restaurant and the hotel if possible to keep the smoke out of that area. Laundry fires, once again, if the building's designed correctly, it should be a separation between that building, the laundry area, and the building itself. Sometimes it's a separate a building or attached portion of the building on the outside that has a separating wall, but understand, once again, a lot of times you're going to have employees that are going to continue to try to put the fire out, so you may find victims in those layers as well. Check for vertical extension. I know that at least a couple of fires that have occurred here in the valley that the fire started in the laundry room, extended up into the attic, and burned the roof off of some of the structures. Atriums, here, obviously not going to see those on motels, but you might see that on some of your mid-rise hotels, and certainly some of the high-rise hotels you'll see at atrium. Certainly a challenge for us. Obviously, if you get a fire in the lobby area, that fire will extend, or that at least the smoke will extend up into multiple floors here. Most of the places that have an atrium also will have some kind of smoke removal system as well. If it's working anyway, that hopefully will help remove some of that smoke, but it can certainly create a challenge for us. Fires in the atrium, most of the time are going to be a situation where you're going to be pulling hand lines straight off the engine company into the lobby and into the area that's going to be involved there. Eating banquet rooms, we talked about that. Not a particularly high risk area, but there may be a situation where either we talked about the ASU incident that occurred here. We have combustibles, stored combustibles, something like that. Maybe an arson type situation, and same thing with bars, where for the most part won't be different than any other type of incident in that type of location that we go to. Parking garages, I have a whole different class on that, so we won't spend a ton of time with that, other than just knowing your focus is going to be able to try to keep that fire from extending from one car to the next, and then trying to keep it from extending from the garage into the hotel itself. And one of the challenges you have there is obviously doors. Most of the time, most hotels will have doors on each floor that allow you to go from the hotel into the parking garage. And if those are propped open or open in some way, certainly have the ability to have smoke extend in there or fire potentially extend in there as well. Attics and roofs, we've talked about that in one of the primary areas, and just understand that a lot of the attic spaces are not sprinklered and may or may not have fire stops. So once the fire gets into those areas, certainly has great potential for that fire to extend.
A structure fire with SD Hilton Garden Inn, 2704 OW Curry. Getting multiple calls saying that the roof is on fire, high flames, black smoke.
We begin tonight with breaking news out of Killeen, where you can see it right there. The Hilton Garden Inn is in flames. Fire and emergency crews on scene trying desperately to battle that massive fire, which has devastated most of the building, especially the upper floors there.
So obviously not unusual for the fire to get into the attic spaces on these, and once it does, our chances of putting that thing out are probably, I wouldn't say zero, but certainly going to be very, very difficult for us to gain access in there and put that fire out. So just understand we need to do everything we possibly can to prevent that fire from getting into the attic and addressing it very early. Hotel management and guests, this is another challenge we have on these types of situations, because a lot of times, at least the fires that I've been to at these locations, especially the hotels, especially the night manager, are very hesitant to pull the alarm to evacuate the hotel because they don't want to wake up 150 guests and have everybody pissed off out in the parking lot here. So a lot of times they will be hesitant to pull the alarm. So they may or may not have activated the fire alarm. The other challenge you have with it is a lot of times they'll send somebody forward to check the alarm. The alarm will go off. They won't call 911. They'll say, oh, I'm sure it's just that faulty smoke detector. So they'll send somebody up to the 5th floor. First of all, they got to find Bob, the maintenance guy, and he's got to wake him up and got to get dressed, and he works his way up to the 5th floor, and he's got to work his way down the hall to try to figure out whether there's a problem. So you may have a significant incident that's been burning for several minutes before you get the call. So not unusual for us. So just understand that you may get there, you may have to pull the fire alarm to evacuate the guests here, and then face some of the challenges that go along with trying to evacuate, 150 people or more from a facility. We talked about that. Okay, let's take 5 minutes, a 5-minute break real quick, and we'll come back and finish the second half of the class. If you have questions, you can certainly unmute your mic and let me know. We can cover them during break time, or we can cover them when we start class back up. But we'll take 5 minutes, and looks like for me, it's going to be 9 o'clock for us, at least in the room. We show 8:55, so we'll come back in 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started again. We'll finish the second half of the class here. So let's talk about some on-scene activities. So we talked about the basics and a little bit of understanding about hotels and motels and some of the construction features. Now let's talk about some of our fire tactics and other things. So response considerations, just to start off with, and I talk about this every class. I would tell you that, and I think our units, and certainly not anything that I'm doing, but just in general, are doing pretty good. If we leave the bay and we see a significant column of smoke, we're asking for a working fire, and we should. There's no reason at all for us to wait 4.5 minutes for us to get to the scene of a fire that we've got a significant column showing, and wait until we get there. Now, back in the day, way back in my day, we used to always be careful, obviously, about, hey, we don't want to strip the city and everything else. I would tell you, strip the city. As far as our ability to get units on the scene, make a significant impact on the fire, operate safely, have a tactical reserve in place, the things that we need to do to make a successful outcome in the fire, a lot of times is dependent upon getting units there in a timely fashion. So I would tell you, if you leave the bay and you see anything that looks like this, I would go to a working fire. Now, if you're going to a hotel or motel, I would tell you to go to a first alarm, because I don't know of any hotel or motel, even a single story strip row motel with a significant working fire is going to take at least a first alarm. If you start doing the math and figure out that I've got to get 1 or 2 hand lines into the involved unit, one on either side, a ladder truck to the roof, an occupant services, an on deck with rescue responsibilities, you're at a first alarm already. So I would tell you, don't hesitate. And I've discussed this many times with operations and other folks here, and you're not going to get dinged. Now, if you go to a third alarm coming out the bay, I hope you got a little better idea. Now, if you're going to that stick farm, a 4-acre stick farm fire, I would tell you, I wouldn't hesitate to go to a second or third alarm there, and people will pat you on the back for that. But if you're going to a single story row motel, going to a second or third, they may question you just a little bit for the most part. But I would tell you, just understand that if you have a working fire, ask for a working fire early, at least a minimum working fire. And if it's a hotel or motel, I would go to a first. Gaining access, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for us as well. Obviously, hotels and motels are designed to keep people safe that are inside there, travelers or whatever else is designed to keep people safe. So as a result of that, that's why you have, at least on the center hallway stuff, you have most of the exterior doors are going to be locked. So you're going to have to force entry through, if you don't go through the lobby, or you don't have a key fob, or one of the residents or occupants doesn't have a key fob for you, you're going to have to force entry through any of the doors that you go through. Most of the motels that I'm at least some of, I know in Vegas, some of the nicer hotels, you have to use your key fob to be able to get above the first floor in the elevator. Now, obviously, we aren't going to take elevators typically on the stuff we have for high rises, but just understand in some of the higher security areas, I mean, newer hotels, they may have additional security layers to try to keep people from getting out of stairwells into rooms, and those kind of things are onto floors. So you may have to have a key fob or something just to get out of that. You can get into the stairwell, but getting out of the stairwell above the first floor may be a challenge for us. So just understanding the importance of that most of these hotels will have either a metal clad or solid core doors. So they're not going to be easy to get through. They're going to be a challenge for us. So it's not going to be as easy as, and you're in a hallway, a center hallway with 46 rooms on a floor, and you're trying to figure out, I need to open up 12 of these things. How long is it going to take us to force entry into 12 metal clad doors, with a deadbolt? And I know, our folks are pretty good. I know we got the big blue door, the monster out there that we've all probably played with a little bit and stuff, but I've watched people trying to get through just apartment doors, metal apartment doors and stuff, and watch people bang on them and beat on them and for 4 or 5 minutes, and you go, okay, now do that 20 more times in that same floor, and maybe a limited visibility situation. It's a challenge for us. We need to understand. So if we can get a master key or a key fob, most of the hotels, anything newer, is probably going to have a key fob versus a key itself. Some of the older hotels and motels certainly will have keys, but if we can get some of those keys from the front office or key fobs, it'll certainly improve our chances of our folks being able to make access into some of these rooms much quicker here, and not delay our access to either a search and rescue or a fire attack. So, bringing up an axe, a Halligan, and a sledgehammer may or may not be as efficient as we need to. So things to consider, obviously, if we do have the rabbit tools and other things like that, bring them with us as a consideration for us if we don't have the key fob or key to gain access and be able to allow us to make entry and get into these rooms a little faster. Some of our fire ground factors, obviously, we're not going to go through all these because there's a whole class on fire ground factors as well here. But we've talked about building construction. Occupancy is going to be a challenge, obviously, for us because we have some of these facilities can have, you may have 8 or 10 people staying in one. I was watching a TikTok the other day talking about people and occupancies and how, just like we talked about with storage facilities, how people are living in storage facilities now with, saving money. There was a TikTok showing people how, here's how you you pay for a single room in a hotel and get 15 people in it, and they're sneaking them in the back door. They pay for the single room and then ask for 19 towels and 3 rollaway beds, and then next thing you know, they got 15 people in the room for an $85 a night. But anyway, so just understand there's all kinds of funky stuff like that. Arrangement and exposure, we talked about that as far as the challenges we have there with setbacks and other things for certain types, especially the resort situations where we may have difficulty in some of the garden style hotels. Fire, life hazard, resources, action, circumstances, those are all variables that depend on the situation, depends on the fire itself as to how much of a challenge these will be for us. And we've kind of talked about that before, and we'll talk a little more about it as we go forward. The fire ground factors, we're not going to go through that, but there's certainly available. If you come back and look at that later, you can see some of the different fire ground factors. Declaring a strategy. For the most part, I don't know that I've ever been to a motel, hotel fire that I started off defensive. I think the vast majority of everything we're going to go to is going to be offensive just because of the life hazard associated with it. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say it couldn't be, but I can't imagine a situation where we would pull up unless it's in a stick frame phase, where we would pull up and declare a hotel defensive. Even if we have a significant attic fire or roof fire like we've seen so far here, there's probably stuff we can certainly do from an evacuation perspective, at least for a little while here, without worrying about collapse hazards and other things. So something to consider. So I would tell you that we're going to be operating in the green on the vast majority of the hotel motel fires that we go to, just because of the potential for life safety and the hazard there. So, but we also aren't going to be stupid. At some point in time, if we're burning that roof off, at some point in time, we've got to decide that whether or not it was appropriate for us, at least stay on the upper floors. If, depending on what we have, roof loading and other things, we may be able to operate on lower floors even for quite a while longer. And I'll try to send the link out to anybody that wants this. I was watching, this is one of those things that just shows you a little bit. I've got some flaws, some brain flaws, but anyway, the other night I'm at home watching YouTube videos on a fire in Burbank, California, a 3-story apartment fire. But I watched LA City for an entire hour work inside of a apartment fire where the entire roof burned off and they never left. I don't know what kind of deal they've struck with the devil that they don't kill 10 people a day over in LA County. But one of the most spectacular things I've seen, they burned this entire roof off. I watched literally a 45-minute video, and they burned the entire roof off, and you could still, during the entire time, watch lines coming up from inside the structure that you just scratch your head and wonder why. So anyway, I'm not certainly advocating that we stay inside something that's burning the roof off of and put our people at risk when we know we've got an all clear. I think that's foolish from our perspective. We need to know when to move to either a yellow or red category here and evacuate the structure. But just understand, in the vast majority of the cases we go to a hotel fire or motel fire, we're going to be operating in the green to start. Obviously, our tactical priorities here, just a little recap and refresher here. Tactical priorities are rescue, fire control, property conservation will be our 3 tactical priorities, with fire safety obviously being our priority throughout here. And so we need to understand, depending on the situation, our focus we may exercise fire control and fire attack in an effort to try to protect the other people that are on that floor. We may try to take the fire away from the victims versus the victims from the fire, or a combination of both, obviously. But just understand, this is our focus always needs to be on rescue and a primary all clear on the involved floors at any point in time. So we can't ignore one to do the other, but they may occur simultaneously, or we may focus our efforts on making the fire attack until we get additional crews there, because if we can shut the fire down and keep it into one room, we may not have to worry about evacuating the 2nd and 3rd or 4th floor, or whatever, depends on what's going on. So just the tactical priorities in mind. We talked about, so just one of the things that we can do if we have incidents is we talk about life safety issues, is if possible, try to get somebody from the hotel staff to give you as best of a accountability for the people they know that they have on premises. That may at least give us a general idea of whether we're looking at 150 people that have checked in here or 25 people. It gives us a general idea of facing here. Incident action plan. I won't go through each one of these bullet points, but obviously you can see the difference between our offensive strategy, which is an aggressive approach, and transitional attack, interior fire attack, versus a defensive strategy, which is maybe something that we may transition to at some point in time. But once again, our primary focus will be on an offensive strategy and completing a search and rescue of the involved occupancy. Supply lines. I would tell you that we need to delay supply lines in. I would tell you, if we have a known rescue, certainly we can bypass that supply line. If we have a known rescue, and I know that a lot of people will say, well, it's a hotel, we obviously have a known rescue. And I would say, yeah, in some situations, but I would also tell you that that depending on the circumstances, the time of day, the units responding, how close they are, and those kind of things, I would tell you, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I had a significant fire in a hotel or motel and went with tank water. And I'll show you some examples of what we're talking about here in a minute, where we went with tank water but didn't have enough water, and now we have a significant fire, and we're waiting for the second due company that's down the street that finds a dry hydrant. And as Murphy's Law said, that's what happens. And now we have a significant fire that's extending to other rooms, and we don't have the ability to effect rescues and other things because we don't have a protection line in place. So I would tell you that if we don't have a known working fire, consider laying your own supply line coming in unless you have another exception to that rule. But because most of the time, things get better when we have a supply line. So you can see of some other fires here. Consider water supplies from different directions. Obviously, depending on the type of incident we had, and Chief Barton was talking about here just a minute ago or so here, just some of these situations, some of the things we'll be talking about here a little bit is creativity. If we have that 4 or 5 story hotel and we lay a supply line into the front of the building and we have that fire that may be on the back side of that structure, getting another supply line around to the back side where we may take a line up either through a hand line into an adjoining room that's not involved here up a 2nd or 3rd floor, or dropping a line down from the 4th floor down to the ground level that an engine company with the supply line on the back side of the structure may be able to connect in and provide that supply line or provide that hand line with water is going to be important for us. So don't just lay one supply line, think we're covered here. Get yourself into a position where we can have multiple supply lines in different locations around the structure if possible, so we give ourselves the maximum number of opportunities for either deploying hand lines and things along those lines. Obviously, consider on some of these structures, especially the resort type structures that have a lot of dead end areas here. If you arrive at the same time as the ladder does, I would tell you to let the ladder go in first so that they have the ability to utilize their aerial for whether it be rescue, master streams, getting hand lines to various floors as a standpipe, getting to the roof for combination or coordinated roof attack, whatever that may be. Let the ladder go in first if you have that ability. Because once again, on some of these types of structures, depending on whether we have a rescue situation and a profile that creates some challenges for us, having that ladder in a position where they have a scrub, maybe on 2 sides on a corner where they can do scrub both sides, both faces of the building, may be a huge deal for us as far as being able to evacuate people that may be in a bad situation. FDCs, if they're there, we need to pump them. Like I say, some of the facilities we have will be sprinklered. Most of the newer stuff we have will have sprinkler systems. If it's a mid-rise, it may or may not have standpipes. Certainly, if we have a high-rise, it's going to have standpipes and sprinkler systems. But I would tell you, make sure we connect into these. And obviously, if you go to the high-rise lecture, you'll see that sometimes we may or may not be pumping that sprinkler system because it has its own fire pump. So we may be wasting our time if we think we're actually pumping that thing, or even maybe detrimental to pump that thing. But we need to be in place to support it or pump it if necessary. But certainly, if we have an FDC on a structure, we need to connect to that. And then make sure we keep those valves open until we're absolutely confident that the fire is fully extinguished and the void space, any potential for void space fires has been eliminated, so we don't shut it off and then have to run back and try to turn it on now that we've had extension into a different floor into the attic space. Known or suspected rescues, that's a true, certainly a potential for us. Anytime we go to a hotel or motel, we've talked about all the challenges with occupants and people that may be tired or ignoring the alarm systems or inebriated or altered in some way. We need to be prepared to conduct window rescues if necessary. We don't do a lot of them. I know that I'm trying to think in the last 3 years in Mesa here, I'm aware of probably 3 or 4 separate incidents where we've done window rescues or balcony rescues, maybe a half dozen, maybe. I don't know if you guys or girls are more familiar with that than I am, but we don't do a ton of them as far as a percentage. But we need to be certainly prepared to do that, because obviously there's, if we're not ready to throw a ladder in a confined area and make a window rescue, it's going to be a challenge for us. And I'll show you some examples of that here in just a second. But some of the things as far as just being aware of that may be different as far as certainly a center hallway or any hotel fire we have, just be prepared from a rescue perspective, as we may end up using interior stairwells. We may end up using portable ground ladders, or we may end up using aerials or platform apparatus to remove occupants. So that's not really much different than an apartment complex, but it's certainly different than just our residential mindset that we might have. Other things to keep in mind is during these rescues is access to some of the routes. Escape routes may be blocked by either smoke or fire. And then we also need to understand that sometimes we may encounter occupants that either may be irrational, confused, inebriated, or something else, which may give us some challenges as far as assisting them out of the structure or them refusing to exit the structure on some of these types of events as well. So we know our rescue operations are conducted in this order: most severely threatened first, largest group, and then remainder of the fire area. This is, I don't know if you guys, this is that top upper right incident, the one on Dobson and Broadway that occurred a little while back that I think they pulled 8 or 9 people out windows there. That was pretty unusual. We don't do a lot of those, but you can see certainly some of the challenges that we have on window rescues or any rescues that we have on some of these type of locations. This, I think, was the MGM incident. So you can imagine coming up once again, having a ladder with access that's not being used as a standpipe to be able to affect rescues with multiple window rescues here would be something we don't see a lot and may not ever see, but certainly need to be in a position where we can affect those rescues, and getting ladders or multiple ladders if necessary into positions that allow us to be able to affect those rescues is going to be critically important as far as the life safety hazard on these buildings. We talked about spot engines so they can deploy hand lines and ground ladders appropriate, and then spot aerials obviously so they can have maximum reach and coverage of the building for elevated rescues. This incident's one that occurred, I think it's Chicago. It's probably 25 or 30 years old now, but you can watch. I think they made 40 window rescues here, and you'll watch just a couple of minutes of it and see some of the challenges you can imagine. I mean, just think about this for a second. If you pull up here, not only you're trying to figure out how I'm going to get a hand line to fight this fire, but I've got people hanging out every window here, waving and screaming here. How am I going to get lines and people up to get all these people out? So we'll watch just a couple of minutes of it because I think it's worth it, but just watch some of the challenges as they try to remove these people. That's a bad situation right there. It's like a 50-footer there. That's a big one. This is a high-risk window rescue right here. I mean, the potential to get this guy out of here and not take that firefighter down with him at the same time is pretty challenging. You can see this person just dropped his helmet, so that's not a good combination. But trying to get that person under the ladder there, you can see there's 4 different ladders there, or 5 different ladders I can see here. That's not what you want to see right here. I'm down the backside of the ladder. So you can see a real challenge. I mean, you can imagine having a situation where just a few rescues, much less 15 or 20 or 30 rescues. But you know, you're trying to decide with your resources, am I going to deploy my engine companies to pull hand lines to deploy hand lines to the interior to attack the fire, or am I going to deploy them to utilize ground ladders to remove victims? And so trying to find that balance between, you know, which one's going to be better. If I attack the fire, I can cut off this problem potentially and eliminate the hazard, maybe able to, the people are in a survivable situation in the rooms themselves, versus anybody I leave in there, because if you can see that heavy smoke coming out, those people aren't going to last long in there. It's going to be long before they're going to go down, and then now you're trying to remove unconscious people. I would ask you that question. When's the last time you've seen anybody remove an unconscious person down a ladder in your career? I think I've seen it twice in 42 years. And if you want to see even a small person, it is, I mean, I know every now and then, I don't know if you still do it out at the academy, but I know we used to do it in Tempe every now and then at the academy to remove those. I think those dummies are what, 1,000 pounds? I don't know how much they are. They feel like they're 1,000 pounds, but but trying to remove one of those without getting people hurt is difficult. So you can imagine getting somebody that's just floppy and unconscious, and not only try to get them out of the window themselves, just like the Denver drill, but trying to get them out of the window, but now get them on a ladder without dropping them and pulling them down 20 or 25 feet or something like that. It's a high risk operation. So we don't do it very often, and thank goodness we don't, because we're not very good at it, and it's not because we don't try. It's just it's a very complicated rescue. So anyway, these things may happen. We need to be prepared to do so, and I think our people are if we need to. But we talk about, once again, getting the ladder tip at the window still instead of above it here. It affects the window. Throwing ladders, you can see some cities are much better than we are about throwing ladders. I know that even when we do a vertical ventilation operation, if we get 2 ladders out, I was always very happy. If we got more than one method of egress or access, certainly if we're working with the multiple floors and stuff, we need to be prepared to throw as many ladders as necessary. And you can see they throw a lot more ladders than we do. 60 is another thing that we need to consider. I know it's sometimes challenging depending on the size of the facility. We can do a driving 360 of one of the 4 or 5 story hotels probably in 10 or 15 seconds. A lot of times it may give us a great option as far as on arrival to give our on-scene report. Certainly some of the resorts, there's no way you're going to be able to do a 360 without, it would take 5 minutes or 10 minutes to make a trip around some of the resorts. Some of the single story motels, you'd probably be able to do a 360 by if you're stopped anywhere near the office, take a look down one side and down the other side, and probably have a reasonably good side, at least a 270 of what you have going on there. So depending on the structure, but certainly a 360 can provide a lot of information for us as far as the stage of the fire, location of the fire, maybe some access points, entry points that may be mutually or maybe beneficial for us as far as pulling a line through this door with the stairwell on this end of the building that may make it an 85-foot hose deployment versus coming in through the lobby and making it a 350-foot lay coming in from a different direction. The other thing it does for us, obviously, helps us identify maybe some of the building construction, some cutoff points. Those kind of things help us with our apparatus deployment and hose line deployment. It may help us get us in a position where we can separate the fire from the victims and stuff. So these are just some things we can do. And I would tell you, just like it says here, 73% of all Maydays had an incomplete 360. There's a reason for that. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can miss if we don't do a 360, whether it's our first due company or some of our later companies. But I would tell you, we need to make sure we get a 360 at some point in time so we don't miss things, and things, maybe even things like this. If we never go around to the other side of the structure, this is the kind of stuff we miss. Maybe critically important. So that just ruined their day here. Here's another situation. This is an apartment, but similar situation you might have where you've got fire in the attic. Obviously, they've already either went defensive or at least considering going defensive, or at least got master streams up working the fire in the attic space here. And then you'll see here in a minute, there's still a person up here on the 3rd floor that's going, I'd really like to get out of here if I could. So recognizing that in a 360, it would be very important for us. This is one, once again, and now the other challenge you have, and this is what we talked about before, the courtyard issue. We've got a situation where I can't get an aerial around that side. I got a 3rd floor balcony. I've got some, I'm gonna have to get creative here. What do I need to do here? I think we'll speed it up a little bit so you can see, because this video lasts a little while here, but you can see, I think maybe it is just a 24. I can't remember. I think it is the 3rd floor. So 30, so he's got a 35, but they were able to get up there and get this person down relatively quickly. But once again, if we don't recognize it and don't see it, and that person doesn't have a cell phone calling for help, that's something we need to address early on, because you don't want to leave somebody up there that's obviously in a pretty perilous situation here. We don't address that and get them, remove them from the structure. The fire attack itself, when possible, I would tell you to conduct a transitional attack. I will continue to preach the benefits of a transitional attack. I know, and I've been to literally hundreds and hundreds of fire. I've been fortunate enough to be a very busy chief officer over my 25 years as a chief officer, and watching the difference between pre-transitional attack and post-transitional attack is a significant difference as far as the overall safety to our firefighters, as well as improving overall conditions on the interior of these structures. So if we have a situation where a transitional attack is appropriate, we certainly need to exercise that. Once again, straight stream, minimal movement. We don't want to be filling the exhaust port with a medium fog, or doing a big spinning Z, or a triple backflip O, or whatever we do these days. I'm not sure what some of the attack procedures we have, but conducting a transitional attack really can reset that fire and provide us that additional time necessary for us to get people in place, to whether it's to effect rescues or to continue to knock down the fire, but a big thing for us. The other thing I would tell you is that this is one we're not real good at, but it's one to consider here, is sometimes when we do that transitional attack, especially if it's on a third or fourth floor or something like that on one of our hotels, we're really good about doing that transitional attack and then transitioning very quickly to the interior to complete fire attack. But there may be situations where we need that person to stay in place and keep that fire in check, where we say that, that one firefighter, we may tell them, stay here and just keep that fire in check. The other two firefighters, the fire captain and the other firefighter, take an additional line, go to the interior, whatever else it is here. But if we have a situation, because it doesn't do us any good if we spray 30 seconds of water and then transition to the interior, and then over the next 5 minutes while we get that line up there in place, that fire builds back up, now is extended to the floor above. So there are situations where it makes sense for us to continue to keep that one firefighter in place. Very easy to do. I mean, one firefighter can certainly do a transitional attack and probably keep, and we'll see some other examples of it here in a minute, where would be very effective probably as a transitional attack and keep the fire in check while we deploy hand lines or conduct rescues or whatever else is necessary. So just something to think about. It's not something we do every day, because I watch our crews and I watch videos every day of this stuff, doing transitional attacks, and they do a great job of it. And I think it's very effective. It's just they traditionally move very quickly to the interior to continue to extinguish the fire. So please, yes.
As the water gets away from the hose,
Breaks up, yep.
The stream breaks up. We have to think about the amount of air we're in training over that 30-foot distance that hose stream is traveling. So when it's entering that window, how much of that window am I taking up by doing this transitional attack? How much of a risk am I running reversing that flow path and now pushing heat and products of combustion back onto potential victims? So, I mean, third floor, fourth floor, we're getting kind of.
I'll be pushing, yeah, I would tell you, yep. Certainly, and that's a great point. Certainly, do we have a straight tip versus fog stream with a straight, pattern? I mean, those are small factors, but just something also to consider. Yeah, well, we can't. I mean, and we know that, and it's even more so at a distance. Once again, that our movement at one floor versus a movement at 4 floors, is much different. So certainly something to consider, and I don't disagree with that. Just it's a trade-off for what we have to decide about, but we also, everything, as you just to reinforce that, we need to make sure we do everything possible not to take up any more of that window than we have, because once again, anytime that we change that if we fill that exhaust port, we're going to create a flow path somewhere. If the smoke and heat can't come out that window, it's going to go somewhere else. So we need to do what we can, certainly to minimize movement, use as straight a stream as possible, and limit that as far as just to make sure we don't impact that. Obviously, at the first and second floor level, probably not going to be a huge deal. Certainly, as we get in the third and fourth floor, it could be much more of a factor for us. Thank you, appreciate that. So here's a 2.5-inch handline reset, just to give you an idea. We see something like this and go, fudge, that's a big freaking fire, right? But it's impressive. This has been out there for a while, but probably everybody's seen it. But it's a 2.5-inch handline. But just watch how quickly one firefighter with a 2.5-inch handline is able to darken this fire down here to reset the operation for us to work here. Now, obviously, there's a lot of overhaul to do. There's a lot of other work that needs to take place here. And it's not necessarily a true transitional attack, because obviously they're not just spraying it in one window. They're moving it around and doing other things. But this just gives you a general idea. This is not going to be much different than if we had a row-style hotel, 2-story hotel. That, this isn't one we necessarily have to look at and say, hey, it's fully involved. We can't make an attack here. Let's go defensive on this operation. Depending on how deep-seated this fire is. This one firefighter in 30 seconds or less. Let's see. In less than 30 seconds has extinguished all that fire for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of work still to be done, and it can build back up if we're not careful. But just gives you a general idea that this amount of fire is not something we have to just say, hey, we're defensive on this operation. Just something to consider. Here's another example of just, a significant amount of fire. That same 2.5-inch hand line could darken that fire down once again, probably very well, and give us a chance to maybe get up there and get lines in place here, and then be able to make a attack on that fire floor. Please, yes, please. Yeah, no, please keep going. Yes.
But that's
Yep.
the reason why that first video is and why this video is, because what's burning right there is your fire gases and your smoke. That isn't structural burning that you're seeing on the outside here. So yes, that one hose stream will knock a lot of that down. And that's why when we talk about where does the fire burn, it burns where those three elements come together. The interior of that is oxygen deprived. There's no burning taking place. I shouldn't say there's no burning, but
majority of the burning's burning outside. Yeah.
Yeah, it's taking place where the three elements come together. And yes, that quick sweep with that hose line does put that.
Vent point ignition is what we have. Basically, we have the fire gases and stuff. It's finally got the right fuel air mixture here, and it's able to ignite outside the structure. And that's why you're able to knock this down. Now, obviously, some of the stuff is more deep seated and it would require some overhaul, but gives us an opportunity to look at something like this and not just go, fudge, we got to go defensive on this thing. This freaking thing it's burning the whole place down. But and sometimes it may be in the attic. It may not be where we can get water on the seat of the fire and some other stuff here. But just to understand that there are situations like this where we don't necessarily have to be. I mean, obviously, there's a little pucker factor coming around the corner, obviously, for a good percentage of our folks, and should be probably that this is a challenge for us, but it's not insurmountable. This isn't something we need to automatically look at and go immediately to the red and say we're defensive and stuff. There's some options we have here, certainly for the first and second floor minimum, and probably for the third floor if we deploy hand lines and operate correctly. So just as a reminder, we talked about this. After we knock down the fire, check for that attic extension as soon as possible and gain the access into those void spaces. Once again, we have to address that. I know we try to limit our damage, but there's things we can do to access those void spaces and common plumbing and utility chases to just check, make sure we don't have smoke or fire in there. Because once again, it doesn't do us any good to say, hey, we were really trying to be careful not to punch a hole into that second floor utility chase. And as a result of that, the fire extended into the attic. And next thing we know, we say, hey, we got some pressurized smoke coming out of the eaves up here on this attic here. And you keep checking. Next thing you know, you're chasing things and it's in the attic, and the next thing you got a fire looking like this, and we go, fudge. We just burned the whole roof off this place, and we probably could have stopped it if we would have done a little bit of additional exploration and checking for extension here versus trying to limit all of our damage to the floor involved here. So just some things to think about. Don't stay in the building too long. This is just one, just as you'll see here, they're burning the roof off this place here, and it happens sometimes. We may be some defensible space. We don't necessarily have to write off a whole building every time. We may be able to get up there and go down 2 or 3 rooms, see if we can pull some attic, pull some ceiling and see if we can get some lines up into the attic space here and maybe cut this fire off. But a lot of times with the common attic, there may be far passive before we get there. When these fires are burning, by the time we conduct all the other things that we need to do as far as with our companies on scene, as far as conducting that search of that third floor or trying to attack the fire on there, by the time we get to the point where we have additional crews to try to do a cutoff point, a lot of times that fire's gone past there and it burns the roof off and we may need to evacuate the building. Another common attic thing here, the single story stuff. This just shows you a little bit of rapid fire spread. You can just see how quickly this stuff, you can see that obviously, and for the most part, modern fire behavior, the studies have shown for the most part, almost every attic fire is somewhat vent limited just because there's never enough, unless the entire roof is off, there's probably never enough to have everything pre-burning. But you can see how quickly this can extend here as it burns holes through. This is one of the reasons we don't cut vertical ventilation holes a lot in attic fires, because all it does is give it the air it needs and it gets bigger. So I'll move forward a little bit here. But you can see just over a minute period, it extended from one end of that attic, or at least over that area there, to the other side pretty quickly. So it's hard for us sometimes to get ahead of these fires when we talk about, hey, let's do a cutoff point and stuff like that. Everything has to work. You need to be pretty efficient and have people in the right places for that to work a lot of times, just because by the time I deploy a hand line, if I started deploying a hand line at this point, by the time they get here, it's at that point. So it may be past us. So sometimes we have to be pretty pessimistic in our cutoff points, but not saying don't do it, just saying I wouldn't send somebody to this apartment here thinking you're going to cut off the fire when it's here, because otherwise you're going to find that it's past you when you get there. So just some things to think about. This, watch for wind-driven fires. This is an incident that occurred in Texas here. Burned off the gable end here, obviously fell down on the firefighters here, but just understand wind-driven fires are going to be a huge challenge for us with any type of incident we have, whether it be hotel, motel, apartment fire, single-story residence, whatever it may be. Obviously, the flow paths generated by wind-driven situations can be extremely dangerous for our folks. So I wouldn't ignore those. Be aware of those flow paths, because if we operate downwind of some of these situations and we have a window or door failure, or somebody opens a door or window, we certainly can get ourselves into a flow path that can be extremely dangerous and potentially fatal for our folks. So initial company assignments, this is just really basic, and every situation is different. So this is just kind of a general idea. We typically want one hand line into the involved room with a transitional attack if indicated. We need to get a line above the floor, the fire floor. We need to get at some point in time, and it may be the same line that goes to the right or left of the involved room on a hotel. At some point in time, if there's a floor below, we need to get to line floor below. We need to get a ladder on the roof above at some point in time. It probably to give us a roof report, ventilation, combination roof attack potentially. Another ladder for support activities, whether it be ventilation or forcible entry. A company for on deck with rescue responsibilities, and a company for on deck is what we, on a majority of our hotel fires, is probably where we're going to be operating as far as just companies that are going to get assignments at some point in time. So that gives us 9 companies. And that's with having just, well, basically 2 trucks and a tactical reserve perspective. So you're going to need at least a first alarm. And that's when we talked about even a small single story row motel will need a first alarm as well. So it just gives you a general idea on probably the companies that need to go. Extended hose lays, I would just tell you, be familiar with it. We don't do a lot of these. I know we used to have the horizontal standpipe we used to use, and some cities still use that. I know there's been, with some of the new research, and I wouldn't say research, but just some of the common sense stuff that came out after that they've looked at the horizontal standpipe anyway. A lot of cities aren't using the horizontal standpipe anymore, but we also may not be quite as familiar and comfortable with the extended hose lays. And just a reminder, we know also we need to make sure we secure that bail in an open position. They had a incident in Mesa here where it wasn't secured open and the line got closed off a little bit, and we had some challenges associated with it. So I would tell you, make sure that if we do the extended hose lay, that we do secure that bail open, so we don't have to worry about that line being shut off or compromising our flow of our hand line. Creativity. This is one we talked about a little bit during the break. I probably should have unmuted my mic because it was a good conversation we've had with some of the crews in the room here, but our people in the room. But I would tell you that if we have a significant incident in a fire that's above the first floor, creativity should be one of the things that you should be thinking about as far as deploying our hand lines, so that we can get the, we always talk about quickest water, best water in a lot of these situations. And if we can bypass a portion of the deployment time by creativity, I would say exercise that creativity. And if that means instead of going down to on a center hallway, 2-story hotel, going through the lobby, going up a stairwell, coming off an engine, going through the lobby, up a stairwell, down a 150-foot hallway to reach a room that may be involved in a fire, versus throwing a 24-foot ladder to the room, maybe 2 rooms down or the next room over that's not involved, busting out a window, taking a 200-footer straight off the engine company up through the window, maybe even poking a hole through the wall, the sheetrock wall between units, darkening down the fire if we have a fully involved room, exiting, going out that door, and then button hook back into the other room, with plenty of hose line, and deploying that in 2.5 minutes versus the 8 or 9 minute deployment through the lobby. Some of those things we need to consider. Those are things that we don't think about a whole lot because we don't do that. That's not our common practice, because we normally come straight off the truck, or we'll come straight off a standpipe. But there's a lot of situations where it may make a ton of sense for us to throw a 24-footer to the balcony of an apartment or a hotel, come in to a neighboring uninvolved unit, where you have safe refuge. While you set things up, get your mask on or whatever else, be prepared as you open the doorway into the hallway that's contaminated, maybe deploy your hand line 1 unit over. And once again, get that line in place in 3 or 4 minutes versus 8 or 10 minutes, maybe a game changer as far as the fire control and some of those things. Now, we know there's obviously other issues that come into play there as far as the search and rescue and victims and other hand lines on other floors. And so there's a lot of things that may take place, but just we hope to encourage the thought process and being thinking firefighters and not just being rogue, just this is what rote firefighters, where we know that, hey, during testing and during the academy, it says we always come off the front bumper, or we come off the pre-connect, go in this door here and do this or that. We need to understand that there's a lot of variables, and sometimes it's in our best interest to exercise those variables. So if you have thoughts or questions on that, don't hesitate to either unmute or whatever, but that's just something to consider. So once again, does it make more sense to go to the third floor and drop a line down versus try to drag the line up the stairwell on the east or west end of this building, go all the way up to the third floor, drag it all the way down the 150-foot hallway there? Which one can we do much quicker and much faster and still be just as effective or more effective than certainly doing this? So ladder company functions. I'm not a ladder guy, but hopefully some of these things will make sense to us here. Anytime when a ladder company arrives on the scene of a hotel motel fire, need to position themselves in a defensive spot, or at least a spot that gives them the most vantage points, whether it be a corner or whatever, so that they have maximum capability from the standpoint of rescue, standpipe deployment, elevated master stream, whatever it may be. And they talk about, parking on the corners if possible, to give us that scrub area on both sides, potentially two sides of a building. Just something to consider there. Certainly being able to, we need to know that we need to get those places early, because obviously as additional engine companies arrive and lay the additional supply lines we talked about earlier, that real estate is going to become valuable and going to be eliminated very early on. So we need to make sure that we get ourselves in those positions, and then understand that obviously access to the roof a lot of times is going to have to be accomplished by ground ladders. That's just the way it is, just because of setbacks, whether it's a courtyard or other things. We just need to be in a position where we can deploy the 24 or 35 if necessary to gain access to either the different floors or roof level or whatever else it is. Roof reports, depending on the situation, we may or may not send a ladder company to the roof. If it's a tile roof, that's probably going to be a no-go situation. But there may be other situations where we have a tile mansard and a flat roof where we do send ladder companies to the roof to give us information about the situation they have. They may utilize that ladder company to do a coordinated mansard attack. They may utilize that for vertical ventilation potentially even. So there's a lot of variables that come into play for our ladder companies here. So there may be situations we talk about with a coordinated roof attack, whether it be a penetrating nozzle for smaller single-story motels, maybe even the attack spike may come into play, or a hand line up on the roof if we have a mansard attack where we're cutting holes into the backside of a mansard and trying to cut off a fire. Ventilation, horizontal, vertical, hydraulic, PPA, PPV, there's a lot of variables and every situation is different. So I can't certainly say never this or always that, because there's too many variables, we know that. But just understand that certainly if we're doing vertical ventilation, we need to understand if we do that before we get water on the seat of the fire will get bigger. So that's just, that's common sense. It's what all the modern fire behavior studies have shown and everything else, that if you open the attic of a burning structure and give it air, the fire will get bigger. So just understand, obviously, anytime we do ventilation of any kind, it creates flow paths and potentially can create fire extension if we're not careful. We ventilate for these reasons. These are pretty obvious stuff here. Cutoff points, one of the things that as a ladder company, we're hoping as you're doing that 360 that a lot of our ladders do here on structures as well. We're looking for cutoff points as far as making a stand here. And this is going to be coordinated typically with the TAC teams and with the incident commander. But if you look at here, certainly our single story, the top left picture there, our single story situation where we go down a couple of rooms, maybe do a cutoff point, whether we do a trench cut or whether we do a heat hole or a vent hole, and we get companies down below with hand lines, whether it be 1 3/4 or 2.5, whatever's necessary there or appropriate. We might be able to make a stand and cut the fire off. You can see a couple other areas here. You can see this structure here that I can't remember if it's LA City or somebody anyways up there cutting the holes up here. I'm not sure if they're going to do a trench cut or what exactly they're doing here, but looking for areas to do a cutoff. You can see another example of that here. The ladder company's going to the roof and trying to cut off this fire and see if they can save a portion of the structure. This is what I was talking about before on a 35-footer. This is where we start talking about, can we get access to that third floor roof here? And with a 35, you can. Maybe the climbing angle may not. That was actually doesn't look too bad there on that one, but in certain situations it may seem a little tighter than you'd like. And I know every time that I've ever sent crews to the third floor of a tile roof building with that utility chase or sending them out there, it's always a little bit sketchy. I can tell you that climbing to the top of and stepping off a 30-foot ladder is hairy stuff, because you know that unfortunately somebody makes a mistake, and I know we had a recent fatality and a recent significant injury here nationally with people falling off a third floor roof. And so these are things we can't, certainly treat lightly and stuff. It's a high risk situation. Anytime we got people climbing off aerial, certainly much more comfortable and safer, but versus climbing off a 30-foot ladder, a 35-foot ladder onto a tile, potentially wet or slippery tile roof or anything, is always a risk for us. So we need to keep that in mind. Hydraulic ventilation, certainly for our individual, maybe even our center hallway, 2-story hotel room that doesn't have certainly won't have a ventilation system. Hydraulic ventilation may be an excellent option for us as far as just removing some of the smoke and products of combustion without contaminating the hallways any more than we have to, because once again, a lot of these center hallways, there aren't any doors or windows that open. You can open a stairwell door and try to figure out how I'm going to evacuate the smoke out of the third floor, out of a 4x4 opening on the one stairwell that goes to the roof. And that's not a lot of great options for us. So just things to think about. These aren't hard and fast what you have to do every time, but just things to think about. Obviously, utilities would be something we'll have to figure out how to secure utilities for the involved occupancy or the room that's involved. Sectorization. If we come across something like this, what are going to be our predictable sectors here? This is the situation we talked about here. These things are spread. I mean, Gilbert's got one. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting one in every corner, I think, that at least that I drive by anyway. I know these are going up all over the place in Tempe, everywhere. Every city has them right now, and if not, you probably have one or two being designed or put in place. So pulling up on something like this would be a situation, could be a significant challenge for us. But this is a situation right here with a transitional attack would be probably very effective on at least darkening this room down. And giving us those few minutes to make gain entry into the structure, and we'll talk about different. This is one maybe the option we talked about before. We throw a 35-footer to the room, on this side here or this side here, or maybe this room here, or whatever one we get to, and what make more sense to us. Now there may be a stairwell. A lot of times you have a stairwell on this end. It may make more sense just to go up the stairwell and come over, but these are things you need to consider versus coming in the lobby, working our way up here. So our predictable sectors are on something like this is probably going to be sector 3 was going to be your initial sector, floor above, potentially the floor above that. And these aren't necessarily obviously going to be in order because it depends on what your priorities are. So some of these may change depending on if you've got a really risky situation. You may do your on deck with rescue responsibilities after your sector 4, just because you think that's your next highest area that you want to address. If at some point in time you're going to need sector 2 and sector 1 here to check for extension and check for loss control efforts here. Your other sectors you're looking at maybe a roof sector at some point in time if you're looking at ventilation, or if you have potential extension into the attic space may come into play. Ventilation sector at some point in time, you're going to see evacuation sector, occupant services, and the salvage sector are probably some of the predictable sectors you're going to have on an incident like this. And once again, just doing the math there, you're probably looking at a 2 alarm fire minimum on something like that. Apparatus placement, just a reminder here, anytime we have units responding in as company officers and stuff, after the first level 1 engine, ladder, and BC that respond on these things, make sure we don't commit too far into the occupancy. Now, if it's a resort, obviously you can't park outside the resort because you may be half a mile from where they're operating. But I would also tell you, don't stack 4 units into a dead end complex, into a dead end hotel or whatever else, and not give the incident commander the opportunity to have somebody go to the backside or lay in from a different location. So after level 1 staging, try to make sure that as additional units come in, position yourself in a position that gives the incident commander maximum deployability for your unit, so that we can, come in from a different side, that you don't have to say, hey, yeah, chief, sorry about that. We're actually just behind engine 201 and you're going to need somebody else to lay that supply line to the other side here. You just understand with motels, hotels, depending on the layout, sometimes we have 360-degree access, not a problem, but with others, especially resorts, you have dead ends, narrow driveways, you got vehicle parking that's going to be setbacks, you got everybody parking their oversized vehicle, the guy that has his trailer or other stuff in the parking lot that may be taking up a portion of the parking in our area as far as being able to deploy our engines and ladder companies here. We talked about considering leaving room for the ladder, laying a ladder, supply lines from both directions. Just some examples of some of that stuff. Abandoned hotel fires, just understand that there's a ton of these. As I got online and look at these things, boarded up hotels burn all the time. And just like any other building that we have that's abandoned and boarded up, they burn a lot. And it's no different here. So just be prepared, but also understand that they're probably going to be a little more high risk, because as people go in there and start salvaging all the copper out of the walls and stuff, we may have holes into the attic and holes in the floor and other stuff that we don't have traditionally with a hotel or motel that's in place and intact. So just keep that in mind. If you get dispatched, it's maybe a little higher risk. And once again, once we get that primary all clear, we may transition to that defensive operation a little quicker. Salvage and overhaul, not gonna be much different than anything else, any other hotel or motel we go to. Just obviously gonna need to remove the contents as necessary to make sure we extinguish the fire. We talk about, checking those void spaces for problems and things like that. But customer service, big deal for us here, because whereas apartments and residential structure fires, a lot of times if we have a problem, you talk to the occupants and they say, hey, I can stay with my sister, she lives down the street, or I can stay with my brother, or my neighbor, I know them really well, I can stay there. A lot of times with hotel motels, you don't have that. You got people that are from out of town, they don't know anybody at all there, they're not familiar with the area, they don't have any contacts with anybody at all, and depending on what the situation is, they may have ran out of the hotel with just their kids. And so their keys, their clothes, their meds, everything else is up there in the room that may or may not be involved or may not be accessible for a period of time. So it can be a little more of a concern from us for an occupant services perspective. May need additional resources, because once again, they don't have somebody. A lot of times now when we go to fires now, a good percentage of the people we run into say, hey, I'm fine, I don't need Red Cross and everything else because I've got other resources. A lot of these people probably don't. So obviously environmental concerns depend on what we have. Obviously, if somebody gets kicked out of their hotel today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're gonna need to figure out what to do with these people when it's 117 outside, or we're gonna have people that are gonna be in trouble here shortly. Same thing, we don't have snow obviously around here, but even in the middle of the winter time, if somebody gets bumped out of their hotel, they may be standing in their underwear or pajamas or something like that. We may need to try to figure out a quick way to try to get them either into a warm area or something else before we have problems with that as well. Pre-planning, this is one we talked about a little bit earlier, but just understanding pre-planning is one of the keys to being successful in these type of operations. Understanding, especially a single story, single row, 10 unit motel fire, understanding that, we can probably guess we have a common attic and some of the stuff there. But once we get into certainly a center hallway or resorts or some of the other things, really important for us to understand where the access points are there, whether it's sprinkled, not sprinkled, whether it has a standpipe or not. These are game changers for us when we get there. And knowing that stuff ahead of time is really important for us as far as apparatus placement, hydrant locations, some of the building construction, the arrangement, all those things come into play there as whether or not we can be successful in either extinguishing the fire or gaining access to make rescues. So, having a good pre-plan, obviously, I looked and I don't know how accurate or updated it is on our website here, but I typed in hotel and motel, and I think there was eight different pre-plans. So I'm pretty sure we have more than 8 motels or hotels in Mesa here. Now, I don't know if they're stored somewhere else, and I'm just not familiar with that. I don't know. But anyway, there wasn't a lot to pick from. So just understand you may or may not have a pre-plan. So you being familiar with your first 2 areas is going to be critically important for us to be as far as successful in these operations. Distances. This is one of the things that I used to have way back in my day when I was an engine company officer, is we used to have these measuring tapes and then the rangefinders for some of the longer stuff. And we would have little challenges on the company where we would try to estimate distances to windows, doors, those kind of things from the company. And we'd bet a big gulp or something on it and just say, is this something we can reach with a 200-footer? And sure enough, everybody guessed the distances, and whoever was closest, won, and everybody else bought the sodas or whatever else it was. So just things to think about. But these are things, when you start trying to determine, is my 200-footer going to get me to that second floor and 3 rooms in to effect a rescue, to effect a fire attack, or am I going to need to do an extended hand line? Being familiar with that, because if you get there and you're 1 room short or 10 foot short, you might as well not have a hose line with you. It doesn't do you any good. So these are things that we can do from a pre-planning perspective to try to improve our safety in these incidents. So we're going to do just a couple of incidents here, and you guys, if you want to do it as a tax sim, we can, or we can just kind of work our way through it. But these are a couple of scenarios we're going to talk about here for kind of discussion purposes, and understand that I've got the world according to Pat Bailey, but it may not. This is certainly associated with a 2-dimensional tactical simulation that we're going to kind of talk about today, and understand in real life there's a million variables that may come into play as far as whether or not what we think the appropriate handline deployment and what order and how many alarms and those kind of things come into play. So with that, what do you think here? What's your thought process on this? We come up on this, you got this incident today. This is a first alarm incident? First alarm, right? I'm guessing probably a first alarm unless it gets into the attic. We can probably manage this with a first alarm assignment. Now, if it extended somewhere else or we had multiple patients, certainly that could change. But just on the surface, this is one I would probably call at least a working fire as I left the bay. And then certainly as I pulled up, I would ask for the balance of a first alarm on my on-scene report if there wasn't one coming already. So anybody, what's your thoughts? Where's our first hand line going here? What are we thinking here, guys? Transitional. So we're going to go to the door, do a transitional attack, right? Darken this thing down a little bit, right? 1 3/4 or 2.5? 1 3/4. These are rooms, once again, probably 250 square feet. So if we can't get it with 1 3/4, we're probably not effective on our hose line deployment. So we got our first line that goes there, right? So we take our first 1 3/4 quick transitional attack there at the doorway, and then we go inside for search and rescue. How about our second line? Where does the second line go, in your opinion? Okay, so second line is going to go to the room above, check for extension, search, rescue, fire attack, right? We're going to send that second line up above there. So that's where I'm probably going to go with my second line. How about the third line? Where's the third company going for you? Okay, so I may go next door here. It just depends. And I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on what conditions. If he goes in there and knocks the crap out of that thing, or he or she goes in and knocks this thing down very quickly, it may go somewhere else. But otherwise, it may back up the first line if they're having heavy combat and it looks, I mean, conditions are really rough and stuff. It may go in there to back them up, but most of the time, probably one line and 3 people in a 200 square foot room is going to be more than sufficient, unless they're removing a victim or something like that. So I'm probably going to take that third line in there to start checking the long side. Open up, check for extension, check the long side. How about the next unit? What's your assignment for the next unit? Okay. Well, didn't say the ladder. So ladder, we gonna send a ladder to the roof? It's going to depend, right? Because I can't tell here. I can't tell if this is a tile roof and there's no roof access, or whether it's one of those mansards with a big flat roof. I can't tell. So unless we know there, and certainly with your pre-plan or your aerial map, you should be able to determine this. But if it's a tile roof, no. If it's got a mansard on it, I might send a ladder truck to the roof. Something to consider. But my next company may go above on the long side. There's a lot of variables. It may go on deck with rescue responsibilities, depending on if we still have heavy combat going on here. It may go to the right side if it looks like we're extending to the right here. If it looks like that's a bigger hazard for us. So there's a million variables here. A lot of things to consider. I mean, just as far as where those lines go. But this is probably what I would consider to be somewhat of a standard deployment. Any other thoughts where you guys would do something different than what we kind of have here? Sure. Very much so. And very much so, because this is one of those, especially if it's extending or if it's maybe got to the second floor. I mean, getting those people out of here, because once again, there's just as good a chance that Billy Bob's sleeping in this room right here. I mean, he may be still unconscious or who knows what. And for us to spend a lot of time, doing other things may not be appropriate. So depending on what the situation is, getting a company for evacuation, very appropriate, absolutely. And starting with the units on either side and then the long side or whatever, and evacuating the structure, very appropriate. What else? Any other thoughts? Please. Keep going. Let's go. This is the discussion, please. Okay. Okay. As an exhaust port being that whole door, I mean, exhaust port at this point, or what your thought process is? Correct.
But where this fire is right here, this could easily be extinguished from the doorway. This is maybe a 400 square foot
at most.
My hose line can reach that entire.
Yeah, other than the bathroom, unless the bathroom door is closed, probably every inch of that from the doorway.
So I'm coming. Not doing a transitional attack, which is designed to extinguish fires. Now, you may extinguish the fire by doing a transitional attack, but that's not the intent of the transitional attack. So I'm looking to directly attack this fire and put this fire out with my first hose line.
Okay, so if you didn't hear, the discussion was whether or not it's a transitional attack or a direct attack with that first line going in the door there. And I would tell you that and I'm not going to play both sides of the fence here, but I would tell you, if you came up and spent 10 seconds doing a straight stream off the roof and then transition to a direct attack, not going to change the operation. but for the most part, it is probably going to be more of a direct attack here, just because once again, it's not a multi-room apartment where we're going to be doing different things here. This, from the doorway of this room, we probably have access to pretty much all of the room here from that doorway. And we don't have a situation where if we close that, or if we impact that exhaust port by putting either a medium fog or something else in there, it's not going anywhere else anyway, because there's not any other doors or windows. It's got to come out either this door or that window next to it. So it's going to come back out at you, but it's also small enough that it certainly would be able to extinguish that fire very quickly. Somebody's got their mic muted or unmuted here. So certainly an option there, and I think the direct tact is very appropriate. And also there was a discussion, in case you missed that, I should be handing this microphone around here, about whether or not we use one of the, maybe the third or fourth unit in here for, or even the ladder company for an evacuation. And I would say that would also be very appropriate depending on the situation, time of day, and other things. And I would tell you on one point, I would say, you know, we talk about time of day for a lot of these situations, but in hotels and motels, it's really one of those, it's kind of 24 hours a day. You never know if somebody is sleeping at 3 in the afternoon because they worked all night or whatever else. So you can't just say, well, it's during the day, so everybody's going to self-evacuate. You can't necessarily say that in hotels and motels. So very good. Any other thoughts from anybody online or in the room? I'm guessing this is probably ordinary construction. I can't tell for sure, but I'm guessing this is probably ordinary construction, built probably in the 60s or 70s, probably 70s, I'm guessing here. Looking at window frames and things like that, but anything else? We obviously want to check for extension and make sure we don't get any attic involvement early on in this process, just to be sure. But hopefully we can knock it down and keep it to that one room. Please. Mm-hmm. Very. Excellent point. So we talked, and the comment was made here. If you look on the left side here, you can see that vehicles go around the side there. And so probably if we had a aerial picture here, there's a good potential that this may have a mirrored room setup on the back side. You may have the same setup on the exact back side of this. So we talk about extension and checking for as far as deploying hand lines. One of the things we'd want very early on is getting units to that side of the structure to check on the mirror side, to look for the apartment both on the directly behind this unit and the one above directly behind this unit, to make sure we don't have extension. And this is where we talk about the importance of those common utility chases, because this is in these type of structures, especially when you have the mirrored situation, you typically will have 4 units that will have on each floor that all back up to each other. So the bathrooms on all 4 of these will all be in the same corner. And so if you have that fire and it's extending up from one bathroom, it can extend to all 4 different rooms here very quickly, or into the attic space. So just an excellent point there to point out. And this is where a 360 comes into place. This is where if we did a 360, or as a minimum, we look from a aerial map satellite view of this structure to see not only whether this is a full tile roof versus a mansard, but also whether or not we have parking and rooms on that side of the structure, or a pre-plan, can give us a general idea. Because now we took that, what is a first alarm incident, that if we have extension to the backside, just went to a second alarm incident, because we need probably units in at least 4 hand lines in at least 4 different apartments there, in addition to on-deck crews, evacuation crews, potential treatment crews for medical treatment, those kind of things. So excellent point. Anything else before we move to the next one? Okay, so this is the incident we kind of showed earlier here. Once again, this has been on this floor. My guess is we could probably do a transitional attack without hopefully too much breakup. It's kind of deceptive here, but I'm looking at this thing. If we come up on this, is going to be an incident that's going to be a minimum of a second alarm assignment. If you do the math here and look at, we're going to need 1 unit to go for fire attack. We're going to probably need at least 2 more units on that floor for evacuation and checking for extension and getting lines there. You're going to need at least 1 unit on the floor above that for search rescue and check for extension. You're going to need 1 on the 5th floor at minimum up there. You start doing the math here, you're going to be easily at a second alarm assignment here. So I would tell you that I'm going to a first probably when I leave the bay. If this is me, when I pull up as an incident commander, I'm going to go to a second immediately after when I get on the scene here. And then depending on resource deployment, may go to the third, but certainly going to be a second. And if this gets knocked down and we can keep the fire confined to the 1 room here, probably be able to manage this maybe with a second. But if it's any extension, or if it's in the hallway or or we have victims, you're going to go to a 30 very easily here. So if you start looking at deployment, so what are we going to first? So if we decide we're going to do that transitional attack, where's our which will be this first line? Where's our second line going? So we're going to go to the third floor. We're going to go up a stairwell. We're going to go through the lobby. We're going to try to go up through a window. What I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the situation, but what would you do? Okay, so the second line goes up here to either through the lobby, ground ladder, or whatever, do a joining room, whatever it is. But the second line obviously is going to go up there, right? We're going to make fire attack. How about our next line going up? Where are we going with the next one? Could be. So we got a couple of options. The next line can go to backup, depending on whether they've got heavy combat in there, whether it's confined to the room, whether it's extended out of the room. But another option, maybe go to that next floor above. Just, you know, that's going to be our next highest risk area. So these are judgment calls where, once again, nobody's going to fault you if you sent that next company back to that same area, because right now the highest risk right now is for the patients or occupants on that third floor. So I would tell you, you're going to, and if it's, you know, probably if not then, and once again, whether you come off an aerial to do something there or not, but if not, certainly the next line after that's going to be to back up the third floor, the same floor again. So if what order you do them in, probably not going to matter a ton, but you're certainly, these are some, what I would say would be common deployments there. You're going to want to get transitional attack, hand line to that third floor. At some point in time, very early on in the process, a line to the fourth floor, and then a backup line on that third floor would be certainly some of the early deployments. But there's a lot of other factors. Obviously, it could be whether if we have somebody on the fifth floor that's having difficulty breathing, that says they're trapped up there. I mean, that could change immediately, and that third company goes there. So there's just a lot of variables. But just and from a two-dimensional perspective of just things that would be common deployments on something like this is maybe what you would see early on. But you know, understanding that at some point in time we're going to have hand lines on the fifth floor. We're probably going to have a second hand line on the fourth floor. We'll have a hand line on the second floor, but just probably more checking for extension. And then certainly crews on the first floor to check first, second floors for salvage and overhaul. I mean, occupant services, evacuation. You could easily have, I mean, you could have the first line go to that third floor. Your second and third companies may go to just evacuation on that third floor. Your second, third, and fourth company may go to evacuation on that floor. If you have multiple people up there, you may be throwing ladders. You may be trying to get them down. I mean, there's a number of things that can come into play based upon what you're finding. So other thoughts on this? What other things, concerns, considerations, other approaches? Please. And this is one, you know, the mid-rises, this is the challenge we have. We talked, the thought is, do we go to a system sector? And I would say they're not a bad idea. I mean, there's certainly going to be some systems there, whether it's certainly we're going to have FDCs and things that need to be pumped because it should be sprinkled. I mean, this is a new enough building. Obviously, it's going to be sprinkled. Whether or not it has a standpipe is going to depend on the city and when it was built. And this is the same challenge you have with mid-rise that we talk about a little bit in the mid-rise class is that, you know, you're probably not going to have a fire control room. Now, some you may have. Every building's different and every city's different as far as what they require. But I know that as I was looking at some of these during my mid-rise class, there's some of them that have an alarm panel about the same thing as you have for your burglar alarm at home. I mean, they have just a little keypad that just has, you know, maybe a 1 by 2 inch LCD, you know, readout that just shows what's going on. Other ones may have a fire control room. Some may have sprinkler systems. Some may have you know, standpipes, just everything's different. But I wouldn't fault you one bit for saying the systems because there's enough stuff that needs to take place there. Whether or not, once again, you talk about elevators. Can we use the elevators depending on where they're at? Maybe. Have they been recalled? Those are all things we need to address, right? Just depends on the situation, depends on what you have. You know, I know for high rise, if they're less than 10 floors, we don't use the elevators typically. But in this situation here, it may be appropriate for if you've got a handicapped person on floor 5. And it may be the quickest, easiest way to evacuate somebody, you know, on a wheelchair or something from floor 5 versus try to bring them down, you know, using 2 companies to try to remove 1 person. You know, if the fire's on the end of the structure and it's not near the bank of elevators and we've checked the elevators, I mean, that may be an option for us. Those are things we need to consider. So very good point. Anything else? Okay, so there's only one other thing I'm going to cover here. I think at the end here, just this kind of just a summary. Obviously, motel fires are different for us. They're a little bit different than our standard apartment fires. They create some additional challenges for us based upon the occupancies and the people involved and the layouts and delays in reporting. Some of those kind of things come into play. But obviously, if the more we understand our structures by pre-planning and stuff, the more successful that we certainly will be here when we manage these type of events. For any of you online or whatever, if you don't know, we certainly have a Tactical Tuesday library that exists right now that we have 20. Today is actually going to be our 21st module that has everything from on-scene reports to mid-rise fires to big box fires and everything else. So if you are interested in that, certainly take your phone and scan that QR code, and that'll get you to the library that we have. Some of this material, there's 2 different articles I took a lot of this material from here, so I certainly want to acknowledge those folks that from Fire Engineering, Firehouse Magazine, or Firefighter Nation. They had some good information here. The last thing I'll talk about just real briefly here, because we're out of time here for the most part, is an incident that occurred several years back here in 2013 in Houston, Texas. And you guys may or may not remember that incident that occurred. It was at a hotel, but it was actually kind of the banquet room restaurant portion of the hotel that occurred. But there ended up being five firefighters killed in this incident. 4 died that day, and then the 5th captain and the 5th firefighter, which was a captain, ended up dying a couple months later as a result of some other stuff. He lost his legs and then had some infections and then died, I think, in like 3 or 4 months later. But in this incident, if you remember, it was a very hot, humid day, windy day that they had. I remember watching this thing as it was occurring here a little bit, and the smoke was banked down so much that it covered 3 lanes of traffic. I mean, it was just, zero visibility for even the engineers standing out front of this place for a while when the wind was blowing in certain directions. But you can see the situation. I've got better pictures of it here, but you can kind of see the outcome of the incident here a little bit here. This is the layout of the structure here. And just to also kind of put this in perspective, 15 minutes and 29 seconds from dispatch to the mayday that occurred here. You can see the fire occurred in this little kitchen area up here, kind of near this banquet room that was in the front here of the structure. They dispatched, and Houston's a huge department. I think it's got like 3,500 people. It's a big department. A lot of units responded out here. They came out here. They started deploying, and there's a, if you look at the line of duty death report, there's actually 3 or 4 different reports were done on this thing. They're very interesting to hear. They had huge problems with, they had a new radio system that was put in place, the 800 megahertz system they had, and I can't remember. I think in the first 15 minutes they were bonked over 60 times. Crews bonked on trying to report maydays, trying to report requests for service. For additional resources and everything else. Just a huge nightmare. This thing was a disaster, and a number of things went wrong on this thing. But anyway, so they had the fire in the front of the structure here, and you'll see kind of some. I actually should have put this picture last, but you'll see just some reminder here. This is where the collapse occurred here in the front banquet room. I'll give you a little better picture of it here in a minute. And they're trying to pull people out here, but as this thing goes on here, you can see here, if this doesn't concern you as a company officer, sector officer, anybody else, this wall actually collapses on them again, and ends up injuring 4 more people here in this incident. I think there was 15 people injured total, 5 fatalities in this incident that occurred here. But you can see crews are inside here. This is the collapse that occurred, and this is where all the firefighters were found up over in this area here. But you can see people were inside here. But and this is what we do. Unfortunately, we do some pretty creative stuff when we got people trying to effect a rescue in a situation like this. And unfortunately, this one, once again, should have been somewhat predictable looking at some of this stuff. But anyway, came down and unfortunately didn't kill a bunch of other people. It injured some more people. But you can see here, this is the collapse zone. Once again, that's that area they were standing in here that collapsed on the firefighters. This is where the firefighters were located. They found here. I'll show you another picture that you can see here. This is kind of a better example idea of it here. This is that banquet room where the collapse occurs. The fire occurs like in this area here in the kitchen. That's the door they went through. You can see where they laid supply lines here, pulled hand lines in here. They had these 5 people were inside the structure when the collapse occurred. Just before the collapse occurred, one of the firefighters was inside there, and they sent her back to get pull some additional hand line that was tangled up back here. When she went over there, just literally within seconds of the collapse that occurred, and then the line of duty deaths, which you hear in a second here. These are where the 4 firefighter fatalities occurred there. You can see the area of collapse, and this once again, center courtyard, a hotel area here, a lot of meeting spaces and other stuff. We talked about that, banquet rooms. The restaurant was over here. This is where the fire extended into this one unit here. Didn't really go much further than that. And you can see that's the banquet room once again. This is the area that the firefighters, they came in there. This is the area they were working in when it went from limited visibility, they said, to zero visibility, high heat extreme conditions within like 30 or 40 seconds. See that there's some of the hand lines deployed here. You can see where everybody was when the room collapsed here. They said it had been burning for 3 or 4 hours in the attic space. They said, because I guess they had a problem in the kitchen and they were aware of an incident. They thought the fire was out and had been smelling smoke for 3 or 4 hours in there. I don't remember the report. I've read it a while back, and then I read parts of it over the last week or two here, but I'm not specific. I'm not sure exactly what caused the conditions to deteriorate. They were inside there. Obviously, they had one hand line inside there, and another one was being deployed when it collapsed. So it was pretty early on, but I couldn't tell you for sure what happened. So, but anyway, just a reminder. This is like anything else. We just need to be careful on these type of events. You know, certainly. This is a little bit of a unique situation because we had kind of a banquet room and restaurant and stuff, but it's not unusual to find these at hotels we may go to. So that was the last thing we had today, but just as a reminder, just be careful. These things can be dangerous and need to pay attention to what we're doing. So any other thoughts, questions before we close things up? Anybody online have any questions? Thoughts? Okay, well, that's all we have today. We appreciate everybody's participation. I appreciate the input from everybody here in the classroom. Hopefully this was beneficial to you. If you have questions, I'll go back to, sorry, my information here. If you have questions, you're certainly welcome to call me if you want a copy of this program. If you're in Mesa, it's on our website here. You can easily access it through our training division. If you're from someplace else and you want a copy of the program, just give me a call and I will get it to you. Or like I say, you can get to all the programs we have here. All these recordings and the PowerPoints are located on this archive here. So we appreciate it. Thanks you for your participation. I'm not sure what our next class will be, but I don't know about August because we have a lot of other things going on right now, but hopefully either August or September we'll have our next class and we'll get the information on that. So with that, thank you very much and have a good day. Be safe out there.
Thanks, Chief.